Okay, good morning, everybody. Before we officially launch the event, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Just to let you know, we do have translation this morning in Italian, French, English, Portuguese and Spanish, and thank you so much to our interpreters who are always fantastic. If you require translation, you just use the headphones on your desk. So the number of the language is there. If you are Lakhdar, for example, will be speaking in French. So English is number 2 for all you English speakers. The other languages, if you flick through the little button beside you, you'll find your language in those ones. So that's from a housekeeping point of view. We have 2 panels. So the first panel, we can take Q&A after that, and then we'll have the second panel after that.
Hello everyone, please buckle up. We are going to fly to Guantanamo. Just no worries, no shackles, no handcuffs, no beating, no holding, nothing. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ya hala wa marhaba. Arhibu hayakum Allah. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaba milyon. حبا حبا باللي جاء يا مرحبا باللي جاء حبا حبا باللي جاء يا مرحبا باللي جاء. So you are officially now in our Guantanamo, not their Guantanamo. Welcome all.
Bravo. And now you understand that this is the character who made today's event possible. It's really special for us. I have to say, Fiona in my office made the point. He was politicised in the anti-war movement 20 years ago, and he never thought that he'd be in a room 20 years later where Guantanamo was still open and we were in the presence of men who suffered so greatly there. So it is actually a privilege. It's just very moving, I think, for all of us to be here. And we're so grateful to Mansour in particular, we are so grateful to Mansour in particular, who was the driving force behind this event that we are here today. We have the most high-level gathering of former detainees, legal experts and other compassionate people behind this project to really demand the closure of Guantanamo. So I think it's really special and we're very grateful for that. Now, before I introduce our panel, people will be aware Guantanamo was and is a US military base in Cuba, detained arbitrarily 780 men in its time. 732 have been released without charge, 9 died there, and 39 men remain, which is forgotten, not talked about, in deplorable conditions, with the world gone away, innocent men in the main who never did anything. That is absolutely astounding. And we should remember that during that time of renditions and black sites inside the European Union, there were member states who cooperated and hosted black sites. Lithuania, Romania, Poland. Always a question mark in Ireland whether our use of Shannon Airport by the US military carried people on the way to Guantanamo. In our case, in Shannon, we believe that absolutely, it definitely occurred once and probably on a number of occasions. So European countries were complicit, and European countries have a responsibility now to get behind the drive to close Guantanamo and to resettle the remaining people who are there so they can live the rest of their lives. They'll never get justice, but at least it will be some closure. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the speakers one by one rather than going through them all. But as I said, the man of the moment who created today's event, all the way from Serbia via Yemen and Guantanamo, Mansour Adayfi. Mansour is the author of an excellent book, which you have, Don't Forget Us Here. We had the QR code is there for you to buy it. If you haven't already got it, it's a powerful book. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of monstrous adversity. It is a powerful read, and it's a must read for everybody. So we're really delighted that Mansour is going to take to the stage both himself and Lakhdar Boumediene, my French is terrible, even though Alka taught me at the start. I'm already after messing the first one. Are going to both speak. Lakhdar will speak in French, but they're both going to talk about their experience and what it's been like since they were released. So I want you to give a very warm welcome to Mansour and Lakhdar.
Thank you. C'est bon?
Yeah, if you want,
I can start?
yeah.
Bonjour à tout le monde. D'abord, je vous remercie beaucoup pour cette invitation. L'histoire de Guantanamo, c'est vraiment c'est une histoire douloureuse. Je ne sais pas, je commence à où et je termine à où, parce que c'est... Ah, comme ça. It's okay? Okay. C'est vraiment douloureux quand je parle à cette histoire. Parce que comme je me rappelle mon histoire, je crois que vous connaissez tout le monde cette histoire, c'est qu'on est là, Boumediene contre Bush, et la réussite en 2008, en novembre 2008. Je ne peux pas parler au passé parce que c'est vraiment douloureux, mais je parle après Guantanamo. La douleur, c'est toujours continué. Parce que tous les détenus qui sortent de Guantanamo, personne ne vit une vie normale comme tout le monde. On a des difficultés, des problèmes pour ouvrir un compte bancaire, pour voyager. Et l'exemple, c'est Mansour, dans les aéroports. Et tout ça, c'est à cause des Américains, leur politique, leur vengeance. Et j'espère un jour que ça finisse, cette histoire, avec la fermeture de Guantanamo. Tandis que Guantanamo elle est ouverte, toujours il y a des problèmes, parce que moi je vis en France, en Europe. Mais quand je parle avec quelqu'un que je ne connais pas, il ne me connaît pas, tandis qu'il a entendu le mot Guantanamo, il a peur. Il regarde devant lui un monstre, un terroriste, un tueur, tous les mauvaises. Et j'espère un jour qu'on voit Guantanamo aller fermer totalement, parce que c'est un trou noir. Pour moi, pour tout le monde, c'est un trou noir. On ne peut pas cacher cette réalité. Et c'est tout ça. C'est bon pour moi parce que je ne peux pas parler longtemps pour Guantanamo. Merci beaucoup. C'est bon.
Merci, Lakhdar. Thank you so much. So, Mansour, you're going to continue. We will see, yeah, because there are people watching online, so we need to.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm negotiating to stand because Guantanamo not stand. Anyway, first of all, I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you so much for coming today. I feel I'm alive, not just free, but really I feel I'm alive. And I haven't felt that way for a long time. I'm going to activate 441. Mansour will take a seat. So, yeah, first of all, a friend of mine sent me a beautiful painting, Mahi, a daughter of our lawyer, Alka. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to something special, something from Guantanamo, you know, a piece from Guantanamo. Come here, sweetheart. This is the victim of Guantanamo. This is the victim of war and terror. This is the victim of injustice. That beautiful color. We wore for 15 years. And after, in 2016, was banned. And I managed to get this somehow. I had to wear 2 uniforms, this one, then the 10 one. I managed to get it out. And this is one of the best moments when I got that piece from Guantanamo. I'm going to wear it because to honor that beautiful color. So we used to have like large, this is 2X. We need to request them because it can be just not a uniform. It can be blanket. It could be a prayer mat. It could be a short, because sometimes when we wear our shorts, we had to wear them around our waist. So I'm not going to wear pants, but I'm going to show you. So once a psychologist told me, when you leave Guantanamo, if you see an orange color, you're like, oh no, or an ISIN 441. I said, nope. I have made peace with Guantanamo. And, you know, I will never let them to change me because that place changed you. What makes us as individual unique, our morals, faith, memories, knowledge, emotion, relationship, experience, our names. That's what makes us as individual, unique human being through mankind. In a place like Guantanamo and Guantanamos now, unfortunately, that place changes you to something you don't know what you will become. The more you stay, the more you are distanced from your previous life, from your emotion, from relationship, from family, from experience, from your memories, from everything. And you would start to construct a new you. And that will be part of your life. That will be new you. That will sub your way of thinking, your way of engaging with people, just a new person. In Guantanamo, I went through stages. Fear, anger, hate, courage. Eventually, they call me Smiley Troublemaker, 441. So today, I'm 441 Smiley Troublemaker. I'm not going to talk about, experience, Guantanamo. You're already familiar with Guantanamo. And also, you carried this book, Don't Forget Us Here. And these were the last words from my brothers, the last night. Please don't forget us here. I hope I haven't forgotten them. Thank you so much. So, I'm not here today to represent myself as 441. I'm here to represent us, to represent you as a human being. Because Guantanamo is not about me, not about him, not about him. It's about us all as human beings. It targets our humanity. And if the one who created Guantanamo are going to go with it, they will create more Guantanamos and worse than Guantanamos. So, if they have a power and the courage to do injustice, we are more powerful because we are on the right and we are on the side of justice. Today, I am Guantanamo. I'm not Mansour al-Daifi. I'm also Guantanamo because Guantanamo is also a victim of US policy. We are not talking about Americans. America is a great country, values, morals, but we are talking about individuals. And at the beginning of Guantanamo, we look at Americans through Guantanamo, they look at us through 9/11. But when we start getting scoops through our lawyers, Aunt Beth Jacob, she's like my mother, Andy Hart, my lawyer, we started, looking American differently. Because we weren't allowed to know about them. When I requested like American book history, no, you cannot have that. Knowledge was limited and forbidden. So If I exceed my time, stop me. Because I like to talk. I'm a talkative. Like, I'm a hyperactive person, so I talk a lot. So please, if I just let me finish. So, so I'm not going to spend my time talk about Guantanamo, because we are going to use our Guantanamo to fight Guantanamo now, to close their Guantanamo. And here, at this institution, it's a wheel of power. That's what we came here. We give him that chance to, as victims of Guantanamo, but I refuse to play a role of victim. But also as a victim, it's our duty to speak out, to bring the truth, and to confront them. Because Guantanamo, one of the most secretive prisons in the world, the most expensive one. You get there, you know, you get nothing. Get into the place, somewhere, and that's it. So as victims, it's our duty. And I believe that silence is another form of oppression. Keeping silence, you are aiding the oppressor. Speak out, no matter what. What your brain tells you is not going to happen. It's a self-defense mechanism, just to be aware of that in case. I'm trying to connect my dots. We are here also we are helping the United States, because the United States needs help. It's like a sick person, need mental, psychological help. So we are here to help them and to do the right thing. When we say close Guantanamo, it's not for us, for me, and for you too, because you're also victim of Guantanamo. Many of you, either like directly or indirectly, have been affected by Guantanamo, especially the war on terror, legislation, targeting Muslim minorities, airport searches, and so on. And yesterday I was walking the street, and one of my group said, "Hey, I'm going to buy some makeup, because after 9/11 they allow only the amount of liquid to be carried, but there is a new rules." She was happy. They allowed her she can buy makeup from Brussels and go back to her home country. She get more. And like the rules came after 9/11. Everyone affected by 9/11. So we all also victim of a US policy. So today, we are calling for the closure of Guantanamo. But what closing Guantanamo really means? Is it just shutting down the physical place? That's it? No. Closing Guantanamo means the US government should acknowledge what happened, official apology for the victims and for the entire humanity. There should be and must be reparation and compensation for the victims and accountability. This is crucial. If we need to ensure that Guantanamo will never happen again, we need accountability. We need to see people brought to justice. That we can ensure. Because Guantanamo becomes a symbol of injustice, lawlessness, abuse of power, and indefinite detention. Basically, Guantanamo is a death sentence. And there is shame on the international community. They're watching. So to ensure that when it ever happen again, we need accountability. People should be held accountable, because there's many Guantanamos around the world. And Guantanamo become like, give encouragement, like a green light. Go. If our Uncle Sam can kidnap people, torture them, abuse them, and infinitum them, why not? And you have many oppressors. You take about countries. I don't want to name any countries, but like, you know, we all know. You need just link you to terrorism. Is terrorism a crime? Yes, it's a crime. Regardless. Regardless about the person who commits terrorism, Muslim, non-Muslim, whatsoever, it is a crime and should be treated like a crime, like a criminal. And human rights should be respected at any level. Why in the first place we have rules, constitution, instruction, to be used in the most critical situations? Because at that point will be chaos. After 9/11, it was chaos. When the US government didn't follow their constitution or rules, look where we are now. Because if they stick to their principles or rules, we wouldn't be talking today here. But you know what? One of the good things about Guantanamo, we are all here. So I think if I was in Guantanamo, I wouldn't be able to look at their beautiful faces, right? So what is needed now, really? One of the most important steps now, the men who have been cleared for release. And I can tell you, I live with this man. Some of them have been cleared in 2010, yet they are there because they are lucky, simple. You are not in the list. who cares? Who cares? When camp staff in Guantanamo, if you show humanity or care there, you will be in prison, accused of espionage. You will be classified as enemy combatant. And your life will turn upside down. My brother, Jimsy, 2003, was a Muslim chaplain in Guantanamo. And when he stood against the abuse in the camp, when General Jeffrey Miller started developing interrogation technique to interrogate prisoners, James, his duty, a man came to serve his own country, would put his life on the line to protect his country. When he stood for the principle of the country, his country, he was accused of espionage. He was detained, both in orange jumpsuit, both through sensory deprivation, and enemy combatant. It is ready. Being in the orange suit means like it's here ready for you, regardless of humanity. Sorry, yeah. So imagine if they could do that to an army captain who came to serve, who swore to protect his own country. What about us? We're not Americans. I have a Yemeni passport. Come here, sweetheart. So the point is now, we need to get those men out. Lives behind walls, stuck there. I know what it feels, Sometimes I said, I wish I'm there. Because when I hear they have some problems with the guards, I said, I wish I'm there. I could do something. Because that's what we used to do. But, I think I'm doing something, and I hope that I convince myself every single day I'm not doing enough. So, but with your help, now you are our help, you are our support, you are our power to fight for these men to be released and try to persuade some countries. Even we need each country to take just a single person. 22 years in a matter of few months. We are going to talk about 22 years, the 22nd anniversary of Guantanamo. 22 years. Guantanamo is the biggest case in one of the biggest cases in the 21st century. Really. But the media, sometimes I pitch my article to the media, what's new? Like, what? Guantanamo is still open. No, when is something new? Even for media, they need something for public to consume. Guantanamo shouldn't be absent of the media until it's closed, until there will be accountability. You still have time. So now, actually, our efforts, one of the steps to close Guantanamo, find countries to resettle these men. And resettlement is another story. It's called Guantanamo 2.0 in some countries, honestly. But soon, you will read the second book, Life After Guantanamo. And in 2 months, we are going to have a book called Letters from Guantanamo audiobook. Also, we're going to have a TV show. You're going to enjoy it. We're going to take you inside the detention to live with the prisoners there. So matter of resettlement, and at the same time, we need to work toward justice for Guantanamo, accountability, and that we have a lot to do in that matter. I think I'm going to finish because, but I'm going to talk again, I'm sure. I published an article called The Beautiful Guantanamo. When I pitched it to a friend, he said, wow, this is so beautiful. I said, yeah, because we keep talking about the negative side about Guantanamo. But at Guantanamo, there was life, love, hope, humor. There was death. I talk about how we survive, how we grow up. One of the interviews, they asked me, how did you spend your 20s? And that question really shocked me. Like, what? I don't know what 20s is. But hey, thank you, Guantanamo. I think, always I think, alhamdulillah, I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For me, I take it as a gift, and it's channeled in the right way to fight injustice. Because if I weren't there and that happened, I think I would die of kind of what I have so, but to experience it. And now I'm asking you all to join us the movement for the closure of Guantanamo, the release of the prisoners, And thank you so much. Thank you so much.
What an outstanding testament to the strength of character, the depth of humanity and enormous resilience of Mansour. And it is just powerful. And, you know, we can certainly hold your head up high. You have not forgotten them. And we will do everything to stand behind you in that pursuit. Now, our next speaker is also, as Mansour referred to him, James Yee was the Muslim chaplain in Guantanamo when Lakhdar and Mansour and others were there. And he spoke out about what he saw, and we're very honoured that James has taken the time to come with us to talk about his time in Guantanamo as a chaplain. Thank you so much for coming, James.
My name is James Yee, and I'm honored to be here today. I served as the U.S. Army Muslim chaplain at Guantanamo Bay from 5 November 2002 to 10 September 2003. I'm a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. I also served as an air defense artillery officer, platoon leader, and Patriot missiles fire control officer from April 1991 to June 1993, prior to becoming a U.S. Army chaplain. My father was a World War II veteran, and my two younger brothers also served in the U.S. Army, one as an Army physician, and the other is also a graduate of West Point. According to the U.S. Army doctrine at the time of my service, the role of the military chaplain was to advise the commander on 4 areas: morals, ethics, morale, and religion. Right. The role of the military chaplain was also to advocate for the free exercise of worship for those serving in the U.S. military, for those employed or residing on a military installation, and for those who may be imprisoned by the U.S. military, as was and still is the situation at Guantanamo Bay. When I first arrived to Guantanamo in November of 2002, there were no standard operating procedures, SOPs, in place to govern this Joint Task Force operation. I was part of the first leadership group tasked with writing the initial Guantanamo SOPs for our individual sections. And as the U.S. Army Muslim chaplain assigned to Camp Delta, the prison camp, mine was the religious support section. These SOPs, these standard operating procedures, they were approved by the JTF Gitmo commander and the commander of the Joint Detention Operations Group, and dated 28 March 2003. According to these SOPs, according to these standard operating procedures, my role as the prison camp chaplain was to administer the religious program for the facility and provide religious coverage and pastoral care to all detainees. The SOPs dictated that the chaplain will be allowed to speak freely with the detainees and is to be given as much privacy as possible. The SOPs also stipulated that the chaplain was an additional resource to the commander by which detainee issues and concerns can be addressed. Lastly, the SOPs, the standard operating procedures, further stipulated that the chaplain will provide observation and recommendations pertaining to both the general detainee population and to individual detainee treatment requirements. I want to highlight though, that although we in the U.S. military were informed at the time that U.S. policy would not apply the Geneva Conventions to Guantanamo, however, I myself attempted to the extent that I could to ensure that the chaplain's religious support section still abided by them. And that included putting into the SOPs under the religious practices paragraph the following, quote, all detainees, regardless of religious denomination, will be given complete liberty in the exercise of their religion on the condition that they comply with the disciplinary routine prescribed by the Joint Detention Operations Group in a manner consistent with the Articles of the Geneva Conventions to the extent allowed by military necessity. Now, the Third Geneva Convention of 12 August 1949 under Article 34 states in similar wording, quote, prisoners of war shall enjoy complete latitude in the exercise of their religious duties, including attendance at their service of their faith, on the condition that they comply with the disciplinary routine prescribed by the military authorities. It also states that adequate premises shall be provided where religious services may be held. So I make a note that during my time at Guantanamo, prisoners were never afforded the space or opportunity to attend religious services in congregation, except for the limited few who were moved to a facility known as Camp 4 for a short time. Camp 4 allowed for communal living in a secure open bay facility of up to only 10 prisoners, but was later closed down. So at most, 10 prisoners could pray together side by side in congregation. But again, that situation only lasted for a rather limited time. Abuse of prisoners. While I did witness and was aware of many incidences of physical and psychological abuses, I'd like to focus my time today on highlighting the abuse of prisoners by religious persecution. So let me mention some of the types of religious persecutions that occurred while I was there at Guantanamo as the chaplain. There was forced shaving of Muslim beards. Muslim prisoners who grew their beards for religious reasons at times had it forcefully shaven as a punishment. Guards would often turn the water off just before prayer time, preventing prisoners from being able to wash to make that ritual purification prior to their prayers, angering all of the prisoners in the cell blocks. There were guards throwing stones at prisoners and loudly stomping down the corridors of the cell blocks during the prayer times, done intentionally to disturb the Muslim prisoners while in prayer. There were mock baptisms of Muslim prisoners by interrogators posing as Catholic priests. So this was done in the interrogation room in an attempt to help these interrogators try to gain information from those who were at Guantanamo. Some prisoners in these interrogation sessions were wrapped in the Israeli flag. The Israeli flag has an image of the Star of David. So in my estimation, that equates to a desecration of a Jewish religious symbol. Then there was the desecration of the Quran, the Holy Quran, at Gitmo. And this became a huge problem during my time at Guantanamo because it led to prisoner riots and disturbances in the cell blocks when guards or interrogators threw the Holy Quran on the ground in front of that shackled prisoner, or stepped on it, or kicked it across the floor in the course of, say, an interrogation. Later, the U.S. military conducted an investigation into the desecration of the Quran. And one of the incidents that was even reported in that report, in that official U.S. Army report, was that at one particular incident, the Quran was urinated on. There was also the use of satanic images. A satanic circle was known to be drawn or painted in one of the interrogation rooms. A large circle in the center was this satanic star symbol. And in those particular interrogations, translators would relay to me how prisoners were forced in the center of those satanic circles, forced to bow down and prostrate, like in the form of the Muslim prayer, in which we put our forehead to the ground when we make our prayers. They were forced to prostrate in the center of these satanic circles, while that interrogator would be screaming at that prisoner that Satan is your God now, not Allah. Allah being the proper word name in Arabic for the word God, the Almighty. Right. Satanic symbols. And then there was the sexual humiliation that occurred by female interrogators who would exploit the orthodox conservative Islamic practice of separating male and female gender sexes. So sometimes these female interrogators would perform a scandalous lap dance, so to speak, on a prisoner who was shackled in an interrogation room who can't resist. Or there were incidences where there were female interrogators who actually physically grabbed the genitals of Muslim male prisoners in the course of interrogating them. So these are the types of religious persecutions that were being carried out during the time I was at Guantanamo, and was made aware of many of them. Now, Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions relative to the treatment of prisoners of war prohibits violence to life and person, in particular, cruel treatment and torture. And it also prohibits outrages upon personal dignity, in particular, humiliating and degrading treatment. I conclude my remarks here. And let you all decide whether the types of religious persecutions that I have just described decide whether or not that reaches the level of outrages upon personal dignity or humiliation or cruel, degrading treatment. And I let all of you decide whether or not you think Guantanamo should be closed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. That was absolutely powerful, deeply troubling, obviously. And we're only hearing about it secondhand. We didn't have to experience it, but we are so grateful for your direct testimony. It certainly adds a lot. Now, equally, we are also privileged to have with us Beth Jacob. We had the privilege of meeting Beth in Washington earlier this year. She's an outstanding US human rights attorney who has fought hard for the men repeatedly. She's here today in her own time, and we are so grateful for her tireless efforts to close Guantanamo. So, Beth, you're very, very welcome.
Well, good morning. First, thank you for coming to the conference. Thank you to those who aren't here but are listening, to Claire and to Mick, and of course to Mansour, I can't see, for organizing it. The first time I saw Mansour not in shackles, without guards, without searches, well, except for going through the airport, after he was released, such a privilege, and it's just so exciting to see you here. Although in orange. The last time I saw Mansour at Guantanamo, he was wearing orange because I think you had misbehaved, perhaps. And it got me a little upset, but except for now, usually he doesn't wear that color around me anyway. As Claire said, I'm a lawyer. I got into this work through representing victims of 9/11. In my law firm, I represented the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, who was the owner of the World Trade Center buildings. And then on a pro bono unpaid basis, I represented victims of 9/11, people who had lost members of their family or people who had lost their businesses. And that sort of ironically led to me being asked to represent the men who were at Guantanamo Bay, also on a pro bono unpaid basis. All of us habeas lawyers work pro bono. So I'm going to see if I can do this. Oh, it's already up. The first slide. So just starting, the accent on the A is on the wrong A, but that just seems to me so typical for Guantanamo. Nothing is ever quite the way it should be. But I'm going to speak more about a possible future than about the past. And I'd also like to mention art created by men at Guantanamo. It is just sort of connect. First, though, I'd like to point out that Guantanamo was set up expressly to be outside the reach of any law, domestic, American, or international. And among other things, it is a warning that even democracies, and I'm not saying America is, doesn't have its faults, but it is a democracy, but even democracies can lose their direction and moral sense. And it also shows how great there is a need for checks and balances on the power of the executive, on the power of the government. The name of this conference is Close Guantanamo, preferably spelled correctly. But what does that mean? How do we even begin to do that? So first, I'm going to do a brief introduction, and some of it's repetitive, I'm sorry, of what other people did. Why isn't this working? There we go. So who was there? Whoops.
No,
yeah, okay. Sorry. Who was there? As you've been told, there were about 780 detainees there, and it's language for lawyers. Language is important. Were they detainees? That's a term that the U.S. used because they thought it was less harsh than prisoners. We lawyers argued for prisoners. We lost. But now I think the word detainee carries in itself overtones of abuse and loss of rights and loss of justice. So it's almost okay to use it now, maybe. So there are about 780 detainees over the years, citizens of 48 different countries. Under the Bush administration, most of them were released, 532 at the end of his term. Apparently, President Bush thought maybe this wasn't such a great idea after all. 197 approximately, and although these numbers sound precise, everything there is approximate. Were released because we don't have information. Were released by the Obama administration, one under President Trump, but that was by a plea bargain, not because he wanted to, and 9 released by the Biden administration so far. 9 men died at Guantanamo, lots of questions about how that happened, and fewer than 20 were ever charged with any crime against the United States. And of those, there's only a small handful of convictions. Most of those convicted have been released. Those who are there, except for one, have never been convicted. So, and who were they? I should not have gone to the next one anyway. They weren't carefully selected. There were many ages, although most of the men were in their late teens or early 20s. Many languages. Most of them were there as a result of being sold to the Americans for bounties, ranging from about 3,000 to 5,000 for most and up to 30,000, I guess, for the special ones. Many of them were just random Arabs. Some of them might have been sympathizers with al-Qaeda or the Taliban, perhaps, or foot soldiers, or bodyguards, or missionaries, or students, but it really doesn't matter because they weren't charged, they weren't tried, they weren't convicted, and they were imprisoned anyway. Conditions were harsh. I'm not going to go through that. But despite the long imprisonment, there were no real educational programs or activities. They were isolated from the world. Family calls only started in about 2009 or 2010. The only people they get to meet in person who are not aligned with their captors, and with all sympathy to the chaplains, even they were employed by the military, were their lawyers. And where did they go? That's the next one. They were sent by the U.S. to over 61 different countries, very often not their own. 14 countries had only one man transferred there. Think how lonely that must be. You might think that now, wait, hold on, sorry. And this is, I get this from the New York Times. It's a very good website on who was there, where are they now, where were they sent, and I recommend it. It's usually pretty accurate on where people are. although the names, they use the American government and prison names, so sometimes the names bear only a remote coincidental connection to the name of the person that they're talking about. But you might think, well, we're down to 30, so the people there must be really the worst of the worst, even if they weren't originally. But that's not the case. Those there now, no better or worse than most of the men who were released long ago. They're there because of timing or bad luck, or because they're from a country like Yemen, where the U.S. will not transfer people. Next slide. Of the 30 still there, 16 in what we call indefinite law of war detention, but they're eligible for transfer. 3 indefinite law of war detention, but not eligible for transfer. 10 are charged in the military commission process and awaiting trial. And maybe Alka will talk about what we mean by trial. It's nothing like what you think of when you think of American justice. That's another aside. When I try to meet with my clients and come in as a lawyer, say, hi, I'm an American lawyer here to bring you like American justice, it doesn't go over well. And 1 convicted by the military commission in 2008 and is serving a life sentence. I'm going to focus on the 16 who are designated as eligible for transfer. What does it mean to be eligible for transfer? It means that the United States itself, the U.S. government, through various procedures, decided there is no longer a reason or a need to keep these men imprisoned. 3 of those who are eligible for transfer were cleared in this way in 2010, and the rest were cleared between 2019 and early 2022. For 1 of the men who's still there, cleared about 3 years ago, the determination that cleared him, and I use cleared in sort of a colloquial sense, doesn't have a legal terminology or sense, what the U.S. concluded was, quote, there is no information indicating that the detainee engaged in activities against the United States prior to detention, which I just found an astounding determination. He's still there. Other so-called determinations refer to them being only low-level involvement in activities. These are not the worst of the worst. They're just people with colossally bad luck. So why are they still there? President Biden said it's a priority to release those eligible for transfer. You may remember, those of you old enough, President Obama said he was going to close Guantanamo. First thing he did as president was sign an executive order. There are at least 5 people in the State Department now whose job it is to arrange to transfer those eligible, those 16 men out. But apparently, they say, the problem is finding a place for them to go. The U.S. law says they can't come to the United States. Some would like to return to a familiar surrounding in a Gulf or Arab country, but others would like to go to a Western country. Ironically, despite the fact that they're in an American prison, they look to Western democracies as a place where there's a rule of law which they feel will protect them. And again, weird conversations with my clients as they are shackled to the floor in Guantanamo, explaining to me how the West, with its rule of law, is the place they want to go because they'll be protected. They have more faith sometimes in my country than I do. And also, some are just used to Western ways. Some of them even now like American coffee, another of the abuses that Chaplain Yee did not mention. These are not scary people, except maybe Mansour. They're not rabble-rousers. They're not terrorists. They're men in their 40s. They've never held a smartphone. Just think of the changes over the 20-some-odd years. They've spent half their lives or more locked away from the world. Some of them are very nice. Some of them are sort of grouchy. Some of them are funny. Some of them are artists. One of my clients talks to me. He's concerned that he's going bald. They're people. They're normal people. And they need a pathway to life. Not about finding justice. I don't talk about that anymore because that's not a realistic goal. Just the opportunity to, again, quoting Mansour, just to live their lives. And what are those lives looking like? Not much. They need security to be left alone by the police, to be able to talk to people freely and move about. They need security of a roof over their head and food on their plate. They need help resolving the issues from their treatment over the past 20 years. They need help getting training and education and a job. They need help overcoming the Guantanamo stigma. Lakhdar referred to that. They need to be given a chance. And they need to go someplace where they will be made welcome. Many, if not most of these prisoners cannot go home. Again, the US Congress passed a law they can't come to the US. They also cannot be sent to Yemen, and 11 of the 16 are Yemeni. So what is needed are countries, especially Western countries, as Claire mentioned, to step up as they did for President Obama, and be willing to accept even one man to their country. There's how many members of the European Union? 27, I think?
Yep.
16 men who are eligible for transfer, so each of them can have almost 2 countries to choose from. Very easy. And I and other lawyers for these prisoners, we are available and happy, almost ecstatic, to speak to anybody who would like to explore this, who'd like information about these men, which men might be a good match for which country. And you can reach me. The last slide has my contact information. Claire and Mick and the internet know how to find me. I would like to switch now to art from Guantanamo. Got the accent right this time. Let me go back. Well, I didn't want to go to this slide yet, but that's okay. Because I wanted to talk about art background first. Can people who know what they're doing maybe move to, thank you. That's right, but thank you. So even in the early days, even before lawyers, some of the men tried to create beauty there. Some used tea and food to create colors so they could paint. Some of them etched designs on the styrofoam cups they were given to drink from, which were confiscated and apparently photographed and analyzed to determine what secret messages were being passed. Not until under President Obama did they start getting materials and classes and places where they were allowed to paint and create art. We, the lawyers, were allowed to bring them art supplies, canvas, paints, brushes, sponges, but the brushes couldn't have metal. It's really hard, I'll tell you, to find paintbrushes which don't have a little metal collar connecting the brush to the handle. The first of my clients who created things was a Yemeni who made woven baskets out of paper and straw. And he gave me, I should have brought it with me, he gave me a little woven ring, which I still have. But I really learned about the Guantanamo art when I had a new client in 2016. I should say, over my years, I've represented or worked with about a dozen men. But it wasn't until 2016 that I really got involved with the artists. And he showed up at our first meeting with paintings. And so in the limited time we had, instead of talking about his case, we talked about his paintings and we talked about his art. And he wanted people to see it, and I wanted people to see it. So I networked. I spoke to my cousin, who's an artist. She introduced me to a law professor who also studies political art, who organized an exhibition of the art at John Jay College in New York City at the end of 2017. It got a lot of attention. It actually got some international attention, and the result was all art was banned from leaving Guantanamo. So that was problematic. And I must admit, I have mixed feelings about it because I was glad it got attention, but the fact that as a result of this, it just shut it down and the art was no longer allowed out, did I do good or did I do bad? I don't know. But then in November 2022, when the UN Special Rapporteurs, and okay, you have a very long name, in the field of cultural rights and on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism, complained to the United States. And at that point, the policy was changed to allow art to leave Guantanamo when the artists left Guantanamo. So now it's easy. All we need to do is get the artists out of Guantanamo and their art will be freed. Simple. So let's look at some of this art, some which left. And I think Valerie asked me, did I sneak it out? Did I smuggle it out? No. I wouldn't even try doing that. We carried it out legally and legitimately until the end of 2017. One back, please. That first slide we keep on passing over. Yes, all right. So this is artwork by Sabri al-Karashi, and I speak no Arabic, so apologies for mangling people's names. He spent 14 years at Guantanamo without charges. He was transferred to Kazakhstan in 2014. The photo on my right, everyone will recognize, that's that iconic photograph taken on January 11th, 2002. And then the drawing on the left is his take on it. This is my client who got me involved in art, Mohammed Al-Ansi, Yemeni. He spent 14 years at Guantanamo without charges and was transferred to Oman only days before President Trump was inaugurated. And this is, he missed his mother, who was ill, was sick and ill health. And this is also his reaction to not seeing her and her reaction to not being able to see him. Another one from Ansi, goes without, doesn't need a lot of interpretation. This is the back of it. You can see the stamp, the military stamp approving it, JTF Guantanamo. This one is Ahmed Badr Rabbani. He was a Pakistani Rohingya. He was released to Pakistan very recently, in early 2023. 2 years held by the CIA, 19 years at Guantanamo without charges. And I should just mention the restrictions that I, as a habeas lawyer, are under. The information my clients give me about their treatment is marked secret. It's classified. That's not always the case with the people in the military commissions. It is for me. I can't talk about their treatment. He was held then 19 years at Guantanamo without charges. He's one of those who used tea leaves and other food to make colors for paintings in the early years. And this is another one of Badr's. He was a chef and caterer before his capture, and at our first meeting, he told me in quite some detail how to cook a whole camel. You have to begin with a whole camel and a beach, as I recall. I don't remember the details, but now he's out, so I can always call him for assistance should I ever need it. This is Muath al-Alwi. He's still there. I have 19 on the slide. That's because this is an old slide. He's been there for 21 years now. He was one of the early ones, not the first group, but he arrived in January 2002. He made, among other things, ship models. This is made with garbage. It's made with T-shirts and sponges. He assured me the sponges were clean. Bottle caps, cardboard, discards. And he made this when I agreed to represent him. He made this as a gift for me and gave it to me at our first meeting. He's never seen a gondola, of course. Another ship made out of what the art world calls found objects and what we on non-art world would call garbage. And a short documentary was made about this ship, the creation of this ship. Interesting because the documentary filmmakers, of course, couldn't talk to him. So he would talk to me, I would talk to them, and they made a really very touching movie about the creation of art and what it means. The military stamped it right on the front of the sail, and when I asked Muath about that, he said he wanted it to be there. He wanted people to see where it came from. And it's just another, so you understand how important this artwork is to them and how difficult it was when it was banned. What he's told me, he says, I was asked, if you had the option between your own release and your artwork's release, which would you choose? And without any hesitation, I answered, this is Muath speaking, I would opt for the release of my artwork because as far as I am concerned, I'm done. My life and my dreams are shattered. Whereas if my artwork is released, it will be a witness for posterity. Then another artist you might have heard of, Mansour Daifi. He was 14 years at Guantanamo without charges and, as you know, transferred to Serbia. Little plug for his, I was going to do a plug for his book, but that's okay. This is sort of obvious. And he allowed us to use the symbol that he did of hearts tied together for my little organization when I left private practice I was told I needed to have an organization to represent people, couldn't just do it by myself, so it's called HEART. Okay, so I'm not just about done. So anyway, so these are some of the places the art has been exhibited. Some of the men say they find freedom while they're creating art. Their art is a way for them to cling to their humanity in an extremely inhumane situation, and it's also a way for them to communicate their humanity to a hostile world. We'd like more shows because that is a very good way in which they can speak directly to the world. And for those who are still there, it's the only way they can speak directly to the world. That's Mansour's tied together heart. So anyway, thank you for listening, and thank you very much for caring about Guantanamo.
Thanks so much, Beth. That was absolutely amazing. And I think it put everything in really sharp focus about the purpose of what we're here for today. It's not just to look back and to register the trauma. It's very much to look forward and to see about how we can develop some sort of a life for those people who are still incarcerated, and the onus falls on all of us to do that. So I did let her go over time-wise as well, but that's only eating into your question time, so that's okay, because we can informally chat after the meeting and that as well, and I thought it was really important to do that.
I'm a lawyer. I'm sorry.
So the lads, our last speaker in this session, and we're absolutely delighted to have her, and she's going to kill me if I pronounce her name wrong. We've been practicing all morning and I think I'm going to make a mess of it, but it's Valerie Luchnikovska. Okay, but that was perfect. Did you hear the perfect? Valerie lost her nephew tragically in 9/11, and she represents the September 11th families for peaceful tomorrows. And I've been told that she has been at the Guantanamo trials more than most of the lawyers, that she has gone as an observer many, many times to see what has gone on there, and has been a stalwart supporter of the need to close Guantanamo. And I think it's really special that she's here, given that Guantanamo happened as a reaction to 9/11, and it's just very special for us to have her here. We thank her so much for joining us, Valerie.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. And that was well done. I'm going to try to keep this short, so I may sound a little, just that I'm reading from my script here, but I'd like to stay within the 10 minutes so that the rest of the speakers get a chance here. My nephew, Adam Arias, was killed in the World Trade Center where he worked. I have no children, and he was the closest to me of my siblings' children. I was the only family member living in Manhattan on that day, so it fell to me to report his, at first unknown, disposition to the coroner and begin the search. Later, 2 of his brothers joined me to search the local hospitals and put up missing posters, which I had hurriedly made wherever possible. We just plastered the place with them, as most every family member did. It was a time of wrenching anxiety and grief that too many others have experienced in tragedies around the world. For Americans, then, it was unique, as it had been many, many decades and more since such a huge traumatic event had happened on U.S. soil. But I and many others had to ask, why did it happen? And who did it? Much to my chagrin, my questions are still viable 22 years later, despite the formation of a 9/11 commission, whose report was less than satisfying. There was a cobbled together Office of Military Commissions to try the suspects, based partially on U.S. federal law and partially on the military law manual. At the time, confusion reigned, and unacceptably biased people, such as Henry Kissinger, were appointed to unravel the quest for answers. Thanks to 4 9/11 widows from New Jersey, nicknamed the Jersey Girls, who pressed the administration, Kissinger was removed as commission head. Unfortunately, confusion won, and as I said, my questions and the questions of many others who lost their loved ones in the event are still unanswered. In early 2002, I was fortunate to meet a member of September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows at an anti-Iraq war rally. I was holding a picture of my nephew with the inscription below, "Not in his name." As we spoke, she described and then inducted me into the only 9/11 Families group, just then newly formed, that is anti-violence. The name is borrowed from Martin Luther King, who said, "Wars are poor chisels for carving out peaceful tomorrows." The dubious honor of membership is restricted to those who lost a person close to them in the 9/11 events. The U.S. media interviewed family members who were grief-stricken and angry at the perpetrators and concentrated sensationalistically on those who wanted revenge. Revenge became their byword, and few interviews were made with our members in the American press in those early years. So it is reasonable to think that Americans are looking for revenge if you don't look too closely. Revenge is at best useless, but also instigates a mad cycle of more revenge seeking that's commonly known as the cycle of violence. Our hundreds of members are not the only ones who feel this way. There are many, many more Americans who support the rational view, that of seeking transparent answers and justice, and for those found guilty to be brought to justice and reveal exactly what they did. Justice, not violent punishment, is what we want to bring some semblance of closure to the losses of our loved ones. For this reason, we have backed plea deals for the 5 9/11 accused. This would take away the death penalty and replace it with sentences of life without parole, with clear confessions of what they each did. We would finally get answers to our questions. This would also speed up the Commission's hearings, which have remained in pre-trial stages since 2011. Personally and collectively, we were outraged on learning of the atrocities our government committed on prisoners captured in the name of 9/11. The pain we suffered because of the deaths of our loved one can never be erased by inflicting pain on others. It has actually caused many of us more profound pain to know that our government, our own representatives, have been torturing men in our names. The effect on people open to compassion can be very drastic. Adele Welty, who is a member, lost her firefighter son, Timmy, in the World Trade Center on 9/11. She has been very active for years in our group, but is now confined to her home because of physical issues. She remains deeply involved with the news and keeps abreast of what's happening regarding Guantanamo. This is an email from her to our members on September 12th of this year. Quote, "Last night I had a nightmare." Excuse me. I was being interrogated at Gitmo, and they were putting me in a box full of bugs. I was screaming and unable to breathe. I would have confessed to shooting Lincoln at that point. Yet there are folks who did this to men held at Gitmo. It is no wonder they are not fit to stand trial. And it was done in Timmy's name and the names of those who were killed that day. I am wide awake now and cannot shake the terror of that nightmare. Thank you all who have been a public voice for plea bargains. The terror of Guantanamo and those who have been held there for years, although cleared for release, this prolongs the suffering of all of us. How can we, feeling the pain for who we have lost, prolong the agony of so many men who have illegally and summarily been swept up and dumped into a faraway place for decades, many tortured and abused in various ways? How can we look for justice for ourselves unless we correct this abominable situation? For this reason, I am asking you to speak to your government representatives. There are 16 men now in Guantanamo who have been cleared for release with no place to settle. Please talk to your delegations to speak to an appropriate official in the United States and tell them you are willing to take one or perhaps two cleared prisoners into your country where they will have a proper place to live, a way to make a living, and perhaps even create a family in their new home. Unfortunately, the U.S. Congress barred all those held in Guantanamo from coming to the U.S. land. So I'm asking you to help me, as we are all part of the human community, to press your government to make room for just one or two cleared former prisoners so that they might begin to regain their lives, so much of which they have lost unfairly. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much, Valerie. And of course, we send all our sympathy and solidarity with all of the families of the victims of 9/11. And it's powerful that we have Valerie on board today. Now, we have about 15 minutes for a few quick questions. And I really have to say, they should be questions. I know it's been very difficult, but really powerful what we've heard so far. But we do have an equally powerful second panel that we need to move into at about 10:30. So do people have quick questions or, yeah, sure. OK, well, we'll do Ilya and Emer. Yeah, OK. And then just, yeah, you'll have to use a mic just for the people who are watching online with your question. And unfortunately, we can't take any questions from people online. Make it quick now. And if anybody else wants to ask a question, just indicate. Well,
hello, I'm Ilya for Socialist Platform from Georgia. There was rumors some years ago that people from Guantanamo were sent to Georgia. If you can say something about it, if it's possible. Is that true? Is that not? Thank you.
Well, if you'd looked at Beth's slide, it said there were 6 people from resettled from Guantanamo in Georgia, but we can deal with that. But Emer.
I'd just like to ask, what's the legal basis for the continuation of Guantanamo, and has the legal basis been challenged in the courts?
Well, just is there any other people want to come in with quick questions? Yeah.
I can answer. The very quick answer is there's a law called the AUMF and its amendments, and yes, it's been challenged in the courts, not successfully.
Not successfully. OK, just, yeah. Anybody else want to ask a question?
The AUMF, for those who don't know, is the funding for the military in the U.S.
Okay.
I'm just asking, James, what did you do when you had all of this? You obviously challenged the military. I'm just interested in the other part of it. What happened to you?
Yeah, just to ask, why is it not possible for the U.S. to change their law and allow these people to stay in the U.S.?
He said, why is it not possible for the US just to change the law and take the people, which is a very good question, yeah.
Because Congress doesn't want to.
It's political grandstanding, in my opinion, and they are just doing it for the local audience. They're not concerned with the rest of the world.
And I think it's a very obvious question, and it's a very important question. But for us here, particularly in Europe, where, you know, countries went along with the torture, with picking up people, with black sites and all that, we have a responsibility as well. It's not good enough for us to say, oh, look, the US, they caused the problem, let them sort it out. If we do that, it won't be sorted out because of the political dynamics in the US at the moment. The Republicans will not change. There have been attempts to do that. And I don't think we can wait. These men can't wait. So that would be our attitude. So
there are many of us in the United States who are trying to press the government without avail. That's why I'm here.
That campaign is going on in the US, but they're not optimistic on it. So the two go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think during this period, a lot of the NATO ascension was tied to offering up black sites and then being very disposable to the war on terror. So a lot of the new NATO members during this time in the early 2000s or middle 2000s was because they were willing to sort of aid in the war on terror, including these kinds of detentions of prisoners without charges. So maybe is there anything like at all that you have come to learn about while you were investigating? Of course, this is with to the lawyer. I apologize, your name I forgot.
I mean, my concern is less about how they got there and more about how to make their life there possibly bearable and get them out. And I don't want to say it's not relevant, but it's not really relevant to that. So that's, I mean, there are books about it and there are articles about it, but I don't really have any other knowledge or special knowledge about it.
Yeah, so there was a question earlier about what I did when I was at Guantanamo. So in my capacity, every day I went into the cell blocks and talked to the prisoners who were there. I mean, in the morning I go in, I get the list of any chaplain requests, but in any one particular cell block, I could spend hours in there just because there were so many different issues and concerns from the prisoners. And a lot of that had to do with different abuses, mistreatment, and torture. So I relayed all of that information that I had to my supervisor, to my commander, and advised him on what was going on. So I kept him informed of what was going on inside the cell blocks, as well as what was going on inside the interrogation rooms, because my commander was in charge of the detention, and there was a separate commander in charge of interrogations. So he was able to get information of what was going on inside the interrogation from my relaying the information from prisoners and other translators, American translators, of abuses that were going on. And in short, after 10 months in Guantanamo, that led to me being arrested by the U.S. military. I was arrested. I was initially, it was stated that I was going to be charged with spying, espionage, aiding the enemy, and mutiny and sedition, which are all capital crimes under U.S. law. But long story short, after months of being in solitary confinement in the U.S., in a maximum security prison in the U.S., all of those charges were dropped. And then I was reinstated, after which I resigned my commission from the U.S. military and received an honorable discharge.
Thanks, James. Is there any other quick? We have time for questions. Yeah, I'm putting people off now by being too authoritarian. Yeah.
No, I have. There's probably a very naive question. Why exactly not Yemen? Why are nobody being allowed to be sent to Yemen? It's probably very naive of me, but.
There's the AUMF was passed shortly after 9/11, and that was the authorization for use of military force, which is our justification for going into Afghanistan and then into Iraq, and was also interpreted to I'm getting to the answer. And that was also the justification for holding people who supposedly, had participated in protecting those who attacked the United States or helping them do the attacks. That was, I think, the concept. It's now embodied in a modified way in the NDA, the National Defense Authorization Act. I think that's what it stands for, which is, yes, as Valerie said, the whole funding of the whole military, but it has its own little section for Guantanamo. And in that law, countries that the United States believes are too unstable to send people to. So it's Libya, Somalia, Yemen, I think another, doesn't really matter. And as a practical matter, once a country goes on, they're not going to come off. It started because somebody who was plotting to blow up an airplane left from a Yemeni airport. So that was when Yemen first got as not a place that people could be sent. And then there's lots of speculation, and I've heard some somewhat slanderous statements about why the relations between the U.S. and Yemen and what Yemen wanted and what they were. But whatever the reason, it was just decided this was not a safe place for the U.S. to send people. And why not come into the United States? I mean, that would be an easy solution, wouldn't it? But if we wait for that, as Claire said, we can't wait for that. That's perhaps a wrong, but the people who would suffer are the people who are at Guantanamo as they sit and try to wend their way through the American political system.
I think it's really important to register that, because it does seem like sort of, it's so arbitrary That's what's so shocking about it. Like, we're talking about a handful of men, really, very, very small numbers in a huge world. So it should be easy to sort out, but the dysfunctional nature of US politics means they have tried to change that law, but we certainly can't wait for that. It's just too caught up in all of that toxic stuff between Republicans and Democrats and that. And those countries are on the list, so they can't go home, whereas the other ones did get out. So I think, as we did before, and Ireland has resettled people as well, that we have a responsibility to chip in. It's not exactly going to make a difference either way if we take one or two extra people. So it was to register that. Now, Liz, and then, yeah.
I was just wondering, are there any particular countries that have been particularly good in supporting the resettlement of survivors from Guantanamo that like Ireland or other countries in Europe could look at and do something similar to?
Hey, hi. Again, since 2017, I will give a brief introduction. I managed to finish my bachelor degree. Hey, and my thesis was about rehabilitation and reintegration of former Guantanamo detainees into social life and the labor market. So we created WhatsApp group, and I started contact prisoners around the world. Part of my research to look into their life, where the detainees were successful in integration, though there was, and I don't think there will be any kind of rehabilitation or integration program for anyone. So countries like Germany, like Ireland, like put all you guys here, and like Qatar, Oman, they were very successful because the hosting countries were very supportive. And also the willingness of the prisoners, they want to really to make something, to make up from their life. So this is the first category. Second category is where prisoners end up no legal status. They live in a country, but no legal status, just under surveillance, harassment by police. They're not allowed to work. They're not allowed to have family visits. They're not like Kazakhstan. And for example, one of the cases where Albania before now, things still, Uyghurs were sent there. They still have no legal status. In some countries, I don't want to talk about myself. Anyway, in some countries, like the worst countries, the United Arab Emirates, where there were 18 Yemenis, 4 Afghanis, and a Russian were transferred to United Arab Emirates as a resettlement agreement. So those prisoners trapped in solitary confinement. And I started following their cases since 2017 and worked with Aunt Jacob, trying to get them released. No families, no legal representation, no NGOs, nothing. So the Afghanis were released. And I had a call, one Afghani guy, I spent like over a decade at Guantanamo, Hamidullah, said, how are the situation there? He said, Wallahi, I swear by Allah, I have been imprisoned by the Soviet Union. I have been in prison in Bagram. I have been in prison in Guantanamo, the worst in the United Arab Emirates. So in 2021, in 2019, the Afghanis were released. In 2021, the Yemenis were just shipped in an airplane through to the United Arab Emirates militia in Yemen, without any coordination, without coordination with the UN or ICRC or with their families. It's just total chaos. So now we start coordinating. Some of them end up actually in prison again in Yemen. Imagine, 15 years in Guantanamo, 6 years in the United Arab Emirates, and in Yemen. So now we started fighting them to get released. I published an article about one of them, Abdel Qadir, and we managed through Amnesty, through ICRC, through the media to get them out, through the tribe connection to get them out. The Russian Ravil, and we had like Cage and with the help of Khandan, she's a terrific activist. We managed to get also Fionnuala to now to do a campaign to release the Russian prisoner at the United Arab Emirates, still there. And the harassment by the guards. In Saudi Arabia, one of the cases I have been investigating now for like 2 years. One of the prisoners were released in 2007, Zaid al-Ghamidi. And when he arrived in Saudi Arabia during that time, they created what they call rehabilitation center, Mohammed bin Nabi. It's like whitewash Saudi abuses of power and so on. Zaid refused to shake hands with the crown prince at that time. He was sentenced to 23 years in prison. Now he's waiting to be executed. He's in death sentence. The second man, Mohammed al-Shamrani, was released in 2015. And when he, in Saudi Arabia, was sentenced to 8 years first because he asked to challenge the Saudi monarchy for the public debate. And so they sentences him to 8 years. Now the prosecutor actually called for death sentence. Other cases, there is still missing cases in Saudi Arabia, and I'm going to publish a report soon about those cases. So my job after Guantanamo to follow, like I work with Cage as Guantanamo project coordinator, where I follow those cases and so on. So they're like categories. People still even worse than Guantanamo. And some of the cases were in like Kazakhstan, Asim al-Kharaqi, only 5 months he died because there's no health care. Second man, Salim al-Gharabi, died also because he was sent to Senegal after 2 years, deported to Libya, and they were two Libyans were in prison for 3 years. 3 years torture and abuse. Salim al-Gharabi, after less than a year, he died. And Kay tried to support him with some finance. He went to Turkey, tried to get a medical treatment, assessment that you have cancer. So this is life after Guantanamo. So we are talking about there is countries who actually honor their, because in their best interest, the economic, the social system. Also, the president himself was supported now in those countries, something like Ireland, like Germany, like Qatar, Oman. You know, one of the stories, let me give you one story. One day we were in a community living, and as they speak English, always brother asked me to translate for them. Once came to me, he said, he had like National Geographic magazine, it's a gorilla on the cover. I'm not gorilla though, but I love gorillas anyway. So he came, he said, meet me at 8 o'clock. I was in the wreck. I said, okay, what? Like, just meet me there. I said, okay. Like some brother, like some either write letters for them or they have some issues. And he had the magazine inside it. There was like, inside the magazine of National Geographic, like men's health magazine. So what's that? I said, like, shut your mouth. Yes, I need to read. So he needs to be educated, he like need to get married, and so he like seek any knowledge because you are deprived and become a man there. So one day I was on a call with him. I said, how are you doing? And like, what's going on with you? And he said, look, I figured it out, everything. And he grabbed his son like that. Look, here is the evidence. So, so I was so happy to see his child. You know, that man, he was 19 years in Guantanamo, striving to learn about life, to build his life. He's sent to Oman and having life, jobs, cars, and so on. So this kind of like different categories. And one of the cases we established now, Guantanamo Survivors Fund, my Aunt Beth, lawyer, and others, Witness Against Torture, and No More Guantanamos, Dr. Mahia. So we established this kind of program, looking at those cases. It's not rehabilitation, it's not an integration, but we look into those cases and try to support mainly in healthcare, rent, you know. So we try to help as much as we can do. And that's what we do now. I hope I answered your question. Questions?
Shockingly so, unfortunately. And I mean, I think when you just see the crimes done again and again on the same people, young men picked up and sold just randomly, who became men in prison and then released and trying to rebuild a life, how difficult it is. And we in these countries with enormous resources can't support to resettle a handful of people. And it's absolutely astounding. And it is true that many of their placements have not been successful, which is particularly why some of the more successful ones were in not even just Europe, but we would say probably Western Europe, you know, where people did manage to build a life. And that's what this is about. it is absolutely about getting those remaining people resettled as soon as we can. But equally, we don't want to forget about the ones who've been resettled in other places. We want to support that, and Mansour and the others are doing that. But I suppose for us here in Europe, connected to European governments and stuff, it's about getting them out. Now, I know you had one question. I'll let you in, and then I'll move over to Mick and the next panel.
Thank you so much. Also, thank you, first of all, to the panel. I understand that once a former Guantanamo detainee is relocated to a different country, that they face like tremendous financial and social challenges. My question is, are you legally obligated to stay in the country that you're transferred to? I mean, I understand that you don't, or like as soon as you get out, you don't have the financial means to relocate yourself, but you do have a citizenship that cannot be taken from you. Is there a legal act that, or like a law that like only allows you to stay in the country that you're transferred to?
That's complicated, as the State Department says when they say they can't find a place for people to go. We, the lawyers, don't know the exact terms of the treaties. My understanding, I think I'm probably right, is that the United States reaches agreements with the countries. And now I'm talking to the last, since the Obama administration and on, Bush pretty much just sent people back home. My understanding is there's an agreement with the receiving country that they're supposed to stay there for at least 2 years. Whether that's legal, just take a step back and think about the fact that we're not sending people home, we're sending them someplace else and then saying they have to stay there. And we, when I say we, the United States is deciding what country they'll go to. There's all sorts of problems, but can't get into that. So there's a de facto rule, as a practical matter. If you're in a country and the country says you can't leave, you're there, right?
If you have a passport.
Well, even if you have a passport, you still, they're generally being watched. So the concept is supposed to stay for 2 years. What happens after that 2 years is very variable. It depends. And some men travel earlier, and some never get out of the country they're sent to.
And in spite of the horrible torture, cruelty and all that, they still could not suppress the people's spirit in terms of the art. And I think art is really so important to be able to express, and no matter what they can do, what's inside you and what holds you together, maybe in those horrible 6 foot by 6 foot spaces, can actually come true. And it was wonderful to see the art of those people. And you said beauty, Mansour, and you are beautiful. So just, it's in you and it shines in you. So that's just, it's a fantastic panel here this morning.
Much, Rita. And on that, I'm going to switch places, hand over to Mick. Our first panel is going to leave us. The others are going to come straight up. 1, 2, 3, 4. We leave Lakhdar and Mansour on the panel, but Valerie, Beth and James are going to leave us. Well, they're only going down there, but they were brilliant. Fair play. Fantastic. You say Lakhdar today. Yeah. So that was amazing. You were fantastic. That was This is not a break. We're just changing positions. Just stretch your legs for 1 minute and then we're restarting. Please, we need to kick. Get their bit of coffee if you can. Literally 1 second now, and we're starting. Okay, just for our people online, the people here are just taking a little bit of advantage to get a coffee. We'll be restarting in literally 2 minutes.
Everyone take your seats.
Yeah, please, yes. No, yeah, no, just come. Yeah, like that.
Okay, he's right. Sit down.
Sit down in this room. Yeah, she's outside, yeah. Yeah, please.
Okay. I too want to thank the 5 contributors on the first panel. It was so moving, and it couldn't but have an impact on anyone that's here listening. Everyone really should read Mansour's book. It is just so powerful and so well written, and it kind of encaptures just about everything that everyone was saying on the first panel. I mean, it's almost a symbol of how badly we can treat each other, how cruel we can be. But Mansour was at great pains to say that the US needs help, but so do those that are complicit in what this has happened. He said that there has to be an apology and accountability. And he says that it should never be forgotten while it's still open. And the title of the book is so appropriate. Don't forget us here, because we have forgotten them. And it's horrific that the place is still open and we don't talk about it every day while it's still open. And the points made by James, if you read the book, the power that they took from their religious belief just streams through the book. It's just so powerful. And Beth was saying that their art is a way to cling to their humanity, and Valerie's revenge is at best useless. All that is captured in the book so well. You just need to read it. Okay, we have 4 panelists, and we want to start with Alka Pradhan, who is an expert on the application. I pronounced it wrong as well, did I? I'm sorry. How do you pronounce it? Pradhan. Okay, I'll start again. Alka Pradhan is an expert on the application of human rights and humanitarian law to counter-terrorism situations and the impact of torture on fair trials. She's currently Human Rights Counsel at the Guantanamo Bay Military Commissions, representing one of the defendants in the capital case of US versus Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Pradhan has previously counter-terrorism counsel at Reprieve US, where she represented a number of Guantanamo Bay detainees in litigation involving habeas corpus claims and conditions of detention. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It is such a... that does not come closer, so let me move closer. It is such a pleasure to be here. It's lovely to see everyone in their orange shirts, and I apologize for not wearing my orange today, so I've got my wristband. And in particular to share a panel with these very accomplished people, and particularly the brothers Mansour Lachler and Muazzam, of course, who are incredible speakers, and whose voices, along with Valerie, are the most important here. In my capacity as an attorney at the military commissions, I am very strangely also an employee of the Department of Defense. And so I have to begin all public remarks with a disclaimer that nothing I say ever represents the opinion of the Department of Defense. Shout out to my DoD handlers and the CIA listening in. And nothing I say should be taken to confirm or deny anything that the United States government considers to be classified, up to and including the true locations of the CIA black sites. So with that out of the way, so I'm here to talk primarily about the military commissions system and the handful, as Beth alluded, the sort of handful of people who have been prosecuted before military commissions, who currently face charges before military commissions, and who are stuck in this sort of endless bleak house type system. And in order to talk about the military commissions, you really have to begin and end the story with torture, and in particular, the CIA torture program. And I'm going to use my client, Ammar al-Baluchi, as illustrative of this program because he and the men who went through this program were very similarly situated. They are currently similarly situated in the sense that they are considered, quote, high-value detainees at Guantanamo, which means they are subjected to the most restrictive conditions of confinement at Guantanamo. Attorneys representing them and anyone actually who has access to them are required to obtain top secret security clearances, which grotesquely limits their ability to interact with the outside world. And I'll talk a little bit more about that distinction of HVD, the high-value detainees, a little bit later on. Really, it's a distinction without a difference, but I'll explain that. Oops. I want to come back to that. So Ammar is 46 years old. He, I know that I'm not very good at tech, so let me make sure that I'm not, go back. All right, I'm going to stop. And if I could go just to the second slide, please. One earlier. Thank you so much. Perfect. So Ammar was, he's 46. He has spent over 20 years in U.S. custody. The first 3.5 were in the CIA black sites. He was arrested in Pakistan in April 2003, and very shortly thereafter made his way, not of his own volition, into CIA custody at the black sites, where he was initially held at a site that is codenamed publicly Cobalt, and is known in some of our documents as location number 2. Location number 2 is described by CIA officials, former interrogators, as similar to a dungeon. And this is from a document that we obtained that we were managed to get declassified, describing Ammar's torture from his interrogators, from the perspective of his interrogators. And you'll see there in the paragraph, it describes the interrogators as taking turns because fatigue would set in for the interrogator doing the walling. And for those of you who don't know, walling was one of the torture techniques used on the men at the black, was approved for use by the Department of Justice on the men, that involved taking a towel and wrapping it around their necks and then bashing their heads against a wall repeatedly. And so this is them describing doing this to Ammar, using him as a test subject for them to obtain their certifications as interrogators, not to obtain intelligence. And doing it for hours and hours as they would get tired. And if you, I know the print is very small, but if you actually look at one of the footnotes there, it talks about, I believe it, one of the footnotes on this page talks about the fact that the interrogators were actually much larger than the much smaller detainee. And one of the results of this, as I'll talk about, is that Ammar has permanent brain damage. He has multiple traumatic brain injuries resulting from this treatment, and that was just one of the techniques used on him. I meant to give a trigger warning before the next slide, which now you've all seen, and particularly for the brothers here who went through some of these. But the next slide, if I may have the next slide, is a still photo from the movie Zero Dark 30. Has anyone seen the movie Zero Dark 30? Like 10 years ago? Valerie, I know. I don't recommend it. It's a terrible film. It's really bad filmmaking, but it was a major Hollywood picture. And the detainee pictured here, this is a picturization of Ammar's torture at location number 2 at site Cobalt. And the interesting thing about this film is it was released in 2012 during a long negotiation between the CIA and the Senate Intelligence Committee, who were at that time on the cusp of releasing the executive summary of their full report. The full report remains classified to this day. But the executive summary was released in 2014. And the CIA figured more people are going to see a movie featuring Jessica Chastain than are going to read a 500-page document similar to the document I just showed you. And they were right. And so what they did was they handed Kate Bigelow, the filmmaker, classified information about Ammar's torture to put in this film and show a false direct link between his torture and interrogations at Cobalt and the capture of Osama bin Laden. That link does not exist. Ammar, as I said, was tortured primarily as a test subject and not for any intelligence whatsoever. But this was one of the techniques that was used on him. He was strung up by his arms in what was called standing sleep deprivation. We did not actually know that it was done in this way until members of the legal team saw this film and then asked him about it. And there's another technique used in the film that's called water dousing as opposed to waterboarding. The U.S. government likes to say that only 3 people were ever waterboarded. Many more were tortured with water. And so I want to be clear that Ammar was one of those people who was tortured with water. May I have the next slide, please? And finally, this is Ammar's torture in his own words and accompanied by a drawing of the walling that was done by Abu Zubaydah, who was the first prisoner in CIA custody in 2002, for whom the Department of Justice memos were actually initially written and then applied to all the subsequent detainees. And so Abu Zubaydah is a very talented artist and has done a number of these drawings that are available. They've been published by the New York Times and elsewhere. And this is one that he did actually, I believe, in collaboration with Ammar to depict the walling. And you'll see, I won't read the whole thing, but you'll see Ammar's description of how the techniques were used in combination. Right? It was never just sleep deprivation, just beatings, just starvation. It was all of them at once with the loud music and, the stringing them up and the stress positions. And at the end, you'll see that one of the doctors at the Black Sites told the interrogators that his legs were not, could stand to be a little more swollen before they unshackled him for his interrogations. And in the second clip, you'll see that he talks about his walling, and after that, how he has been unable to sleep. Part of his sleep problems also stem from the fact that he was sleep deprived for nearly more than 2.5 actually, of the 3.5 years that he remained in CIA custody. First through loud music and sleep and standing. And then through 24/7 fluorescent lights. And so he has problems now. Not just with sleep, but sitting under bright lights. He wears dark glasses much of the time, and he has problems when we sit in the courtroom, for example, under very bright, harsh fluorescent lights. He has trouble sitting there for long periods of time. May I have the next slide, please? Just very briefly, I mentioned his multiple traumatic brain injuries. That comes from medical assessments, independent medical assessments that we've been able to have done. Independent medical providers, and I'm going to get to this in a minute because this is the emerging crisis at Guantanamo, is the crisis of medical care. It's not really emerging. It's been a crisis for a very long time. There has never been medical care at Guantanamo for detainees, but the crisis comes from having men who were tortured, who have never been given proper rehabilitation for their torture, and who are aging naturally and have all of the attendant effects of that. So we did have independent medical providers come down and assess Ammar and prescribed treatments that then have to be carried out or not, as the case is, by the joint medical group, the military medical providers at Guantanamo Bay. And you'll see that he was diagnosed with PTSD, with various other psychological conditions stemming from his torture, and cognitive decline. And that is something that I've represented Amar for 8 years, and I have watched that happen. And those of you who have had family members with perhaps cognitive disorders or with dementia or Alzheimer's will understand the difficulty in watching someone decline like that in front of you. Next slide, please. A most recent crisis that we've had was at the end of last year. Amar was diagnosed with a spinal tumor. And just to illustrate how non-existent medical care is at Guantanamo, he was diagnosed in December of 2022. We had known that there was something on his spine before that. It had been seen, but he was finally diagnosed with a tumor that in fact had grown since the previous time. So we know it's growing, but it's now 9 months, nearly 10 months later, and we don't know what type of tumor it is. We don't believe it's cancerous, but we're not sure. And that is because we cannot get an MRI image of his tumor that would allow them to properly diagnose what it is and what sort of treatment he actually requires. And so when in doubt, the MO of the joint medical group is to say, well, he just needs physical therapy, or he just needs to rest, or he just needs to lie down, right? And so that is what they have said. And we just don't know what the truth is. And so this actually comes from a legal document from a motion that we filed in federal court outside of the military commission to try and obtain an independent panel of experts to assess him, what's called a mixed medical commission. And a couple of weeks ago, that motion was denied, and we will try to appeal in the next couple of months and see if we can get some sort of assessment for him. Next slide, please. Amar is also an artist, as it so happens, and Beth spoke at some length about the exhibition at John Jay, which was, I think, immensely successful. I know we had a ban on art for a while after that, which was a real shame, but it brought so much attention and humanity back to the men, including Amar, right, who is one of the 9/11 defendants. I'm going to talk about the lack of a trial, the pretrial proceedings in a minute. But he actually drew this not as a way of creating beauty per se, although I actually think it's a very striking painting, but as a way of illustrating, again, because of the lack of appropriate medical providers, illustrating the effect of his brain injury on him. This is what he sees when he closes his eyes. And because we, like his legal team, are the conduits to the outside world, right, we were able to take this and we show them to medical providers. We show this to medical providers and say, this is what he sees. Like, what does this mean, right? I'm not a medical professional. And so, this was actually displayed it was exhibited at John Jay, and it's actually available for exhibit if anyone would like to exhibit it at any point. More of his art is actually available on the website artfromguantanamo.com, along with the other very talented men who created artwork at Guantanamo. Next slide, please. All right, so now we get to the military commissions. So we have this torture program that exists between 2002 and really the end of it was in 2007, although most of the men at the black sites were transferred to Guantanamo Bay in September of 2006. In September 2006, President Bush gives the speech, the text of which is still available online, that is largely filled with lies and slander about I'm a lawyer, that is my legal analysis of what President Bush said that day. And I mean, just easily disprovable lies about, for the first time, admitting that we'd held people abroad, that we had an extraordinary rendition program, that the CIA had custody of these men, and repeating, a lot of the things that we still hear from the CIA to this day about the success of their program. We learned this, and we learned this, and we learned this. None of that was learned through the use of torture at the black sites. But one of the things he said in that speech was that now we are bringing the perpetrators of 9/11, there goes the presumption of innocence, to Guantanamo Bay to stand trial for their crimes. And so the military commissions, which they had existed before that, right? And there had been a couple of trials, but they really kicked into high gear after this, because this was meant now to be the 9/11 trial. And they put together these 5 defendants. Of course, the named defendant, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, is the alleged mastermind of September 11th. And there are the allegations against the other, formerly 5, now 4, and I'll get to the why now 4 in a minute, as of last week, pertain to essentially the conspiracy around September 11th. And I will tell you very frankly that the allegations against Ammar is that he was one of the financiers, is that he, from Dubai, moved money to people who ended up being the hijackers on September 11th. The bulk of the government's evidence against these men are torture-acquired statements that we are currently litigating to have thrown out of the 9/11 case, and that have, as of today, been thrown out of the other major death penalty case before the military commissions, which is U.S. versus Abdul Rahim Nashiri, which is the USS Cole bombing case. So at the military commissions, right, they are a purpose-built court. It was put in place to prosecute solely non-citizen Muslim men who were brought to Guantanamo. And it was built to maximize benefit from the torture program while minimizing transparency around torture, right, while hiding the secrets. So nominally, right, so detainees have the right to attorneys. They have legal teams. These are death penalty cases, right? But there are constant violations of attorney-client privilege. We have had informants. The FBI tried to place an informant on one of the legal teams. We have had prosecutors have access to our emails. We have had listening devices placed in our meeting room. So there's just these constant violations. Detainees, technically, under the statute, have the right to confront the evidence against them, except classified evidence, which constitutes a large proportion of the evidence in this case, as you can imagine. We've been able to pry some of that loose over the years and declassify at least some of the evidence around their torture. But I will tell you, as a clearance holder, perhaps 10 to 15% of what happened in the torture program is public. We have access, the defense with security clearances have access to maybe another 20 to 30%, right? I would say that we have access to less than 50% of the full scope of the CIA torture program. And that is because the CIA still owns that information, and it is up to them what to share with the prosecutors, who then make a determination about what they can give to us. And there's I'm happy to answer questions at some point about the whole process for what ends up coming to us in sort of summarized form. They have the ability to call witnesses, but only through the prosecution. I do not have the ability to issue a subpoena for a witness. I can politely ask my prosecutor, not friends, really, what do you call people who you've worked opposite for 10 years? But, we have the ability to politely request witnesses, and they equally have the opportunity to not so politely decline almost every time to produce them. They have technically, thank you, the right to humane treatment under Common Article 3. But there are, as you've heard, a number of key exceptions to that. They do not, for example, it's been 20 years and they do not have family visits. And there is, of course, as the United States government will say, a presumption of innocence, but that has been thoroughly destroyed by the U.S. government pre-trial. And if I could actually move to skip the next slide. Skip that one. Yeah. And go to this one. So in 2017, we had a decision from the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention on Ammar's case, in which These are their findings, right? You don't have to take my word for it. That his detention at Guantanamo was arbitrary and constitutes ongoing torture, that the presumption of innocence has been extinguished against him, that torture taints the proceedings from beginning to end, and that most importantly, I think, there is no possibility of torture rehabilitation or adequate medical care at Guantanamo Bay. And there are millions of reasons for that. But the primary reason is, if you'll go back one slide, if you don't mind, forward one is the one in the middle. That one. The primary reason is lack of political will. This is a memorandum. I'm not going to read it to you, but it's a memo that we sent at the end of July to the convening authority, basically the authority at the military commissions who brings the charges against the defendants and has the ability to determine whether or not to resolve the cases through plea negotiations. The 9/11 case has been in plea negotiations for about a year and a half. And this was sort of a last-ditch effort, right? Mr. al-Baluchi maintains his innocence at this point. And at this point, he has never been convicted of anything. He is, under our law, innocent. But we sent this to the convening authority because he is so desperate for medical care. And all the independent experts agree that he needs it. That if the United States agreed not to use torture evidence in their presentation against him, if the United States agreed to implement a torture rehabilitation at Guantanamo, right, which is unheard of. You don't rehabilitate people when they're in the custody of their torturers. But we were willing to agree to that. Then he would consider a plea deal. And this is what was specifically, this is one of the elements, the key element that was specifically rejected by the White House last month. So the lack of political will to treat these men humanely who have been in their custody for 20 years is the primary factor here. And I do just really want to flag two things before I end. I know I'm out of time. I apologize. I talked through Amar's case as illustrative, but there are two other men who I should mention briefly. One is Ramzi bin al-Sheba, who until last week was one of the co-defendants in the 9/11 case. And last year, after 11 years of pretrial hearings, was found not competent to stand trial because of the extent of his torture and his mental illness. And so he has very suddenly been severed from the 9/11 case, and we don't know where that leaves him legally. The second man I should mention is Mr. Nashwan al-Tamir, whose legal team is here, and y'all should speak to them as well, who conducted, I think, let's hope, successful plea negotiations and a plea deal last year, and has had 6 spinal surgeries at Guantanamo Bay, primarily because they botched several of them because they don't have the ability to do them successfully at Guantanamo. And is now looking for somewhere that can provide him with adequate medical care for the rest of his life, pursuant to his plea deal. So I just want to end on that note, and just to mention that the working group has also recommended Amar's immediate release from Guantanamo. Thank you so much.
Right, Alka's eaten into the time of the others, so they're going to have to be a little bit more concise. Our next speaker is Manolis Glezos, is an Irish lawyer and academic specialist in human rights law, and is currently serving at the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism. Manolis took up her functions on the 1st of August 2017, and in June this year she released her final report on the Guantanamo Bay detention camp. The report concludes that prisoners endure ongoing, cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment, and that the detention centre should be closed.
Really nice to be here. So I want to speak about the report I issued. I conducted a technical visit to the Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, which had 3 parts: meeting with the victims of terrorism, the 9/11 victims, meeting with the men and visiting the site at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and meeting with former detainees in countries of resettlement or countries of transfer. And I want to stress from the outset that this was the very first visit. The UN has been asking for access to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba since, since the very beginning. And every single man I met, the first thing that he said to me was that you came too late. And I agree, we came too late. There were 34 men when I visited the facility some months ago. And all of them were the subjects and the objects of extraordinary harm, including rendition, arbitrary detention, systematic, cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment and torture. And that was inflicted because of an exceptional and international law deficient legal and policy regime. My report made a number of findings, and I'm going to focus on most of them, mostly on the second and third parts. But I do want to acknowledge that despite the commitment that the US government has made to victims of terrorism, there are enormous deficits that remain, both in terms of the care and the long-term support to victims of terrorism. I'm also clear that the use of torture was a betrayal of the rights of the 9/11 victims, because when you torture, you take away any possibility for there to be any legal process that's fair or transparent. And I want to acknowledge the powerful testimony we heard from Valerie today, but to be aware that there are hundreds of 9/11 victims who do not want this done in their name and have been very clear about that. So let me speak to the facility itself and what we found when we were there. And I want to just start by noting that arbitrariness pervades every part of the Guantanamo facility. It is a place defined by arbitrariness. I want to start with the ways in which, for example, it's not just the detainees who suffer enormously, but to acknowledge the harm to the detainee families. There are hundreds of victims unseen. The families who did not know where their family members were, the families who've had no contact with their family members, children who have had no relationship with their fathers, mothers and fathers who died while men were in custody and had no chance of relationship with them. I think when we look at the sort of the procedures, the functional procedures at Guantanamo, and Alka and Beth have talked a little about this, but when we think about arbitrariness, it starts with the SOPs. Those are not shared. They weren't shared with me. They're not shared with counsel. They're not even shared with the men itself. So you live in a universe where the standard operating procedures change all the time. And even the guards that we interviewed told us that they change all the time for them too. And that, of course, that arbitrariness of the day-to-day actually underscores and reaffirms the process of torture that creates helplessness and powerlessness because of the absolute insecurity of every single day. The second comment I would note on day-to-day procedure is none of the men are called by their names. They're called by numbers. And I don't want to hearken to the historical precedent of what it means to call people by numbers and not by name. But it is absolutely true that the dehumanization extends to the kind of molecular parts of the system. It's also true, as my report found, that Guard Force is not adequately trained to manage an aging, ill, highly traumatized population. And that also pertains to the ongoing arbitrariness of life for each detainee there. Alka and Beth have talked about health, but I just want to say a couple of things about the availability, adequacy, and acceptability of healthcare. My report was really clear that the availability of healthcare, it's inadequate, primarily because healthcare at the facility lacks full clinical independence. All of the medical personnel responsible for the detainees' medical care are DOD personnel. And I have profound disquiet that the current supervisory chain of command lacks that kind of clinical independence, and it compromises the ability of the medical professionals there to fully treat and document the manifestations of past torture and physical and mental care needs of the men who remain. Bear in mind that the medical personnel also don't have access to the full medical histories of the men. And it was extraordinary to me to interview men, but also to interview medical professionals who don't ask questions about the past, meaning how can you treat a person in the present without a full understanding of the past medical history of that individual? And of course, a lack of trust permeates every part of the relationship between the men who, again, are aging and harmed with their medical personnel, precisely because in the past, medical personnel were directly involved in the ill treatment and torture of these detainees. So it is true, it is absolutely the case that the cumulative effects of past rendition, disappearance, incommunicado detention, systematic torture and ill treatment continues to have profound medical and psychological consequences for every single man who's detained at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The one ray of hope I found there was the enormous support that the men give each other. And that, in fact, is almost one of the few things that allows many of the men who live these lives in this place to have lives of dignity, because it's the dignity that they express and care toward each other that is, I think, part of the humanity that comes through. I want to stress that even when men are transferred, and I know the brothers who are here can speak to this, medical files don't transfer with you. So if you've been a history of torture detainee and you land somewhere, country of resettlement or country of origin, when you come, you don't come with your medical records. So the capacity, again, to be fully treated and adequately treated for past torture doesn't exist. There are some very easy things to do. And in fact, ALCA and other lawyers have continued to press, as does the UN, that the only way forward on medical care at Guantanamo is independent medical care in the process. That is the only thing that will, as an intermediate step, address the health needs of these men. And to be clear, this is not an impossible ask. There is plenty of practice on things like mixed medical commissions for the US to put in place. The US means what it says about no more torture. That also means remedying the effects of torture in the immediate for the men who remain in their custody. Let me briefly say a couple of words about the right of access to family. And I want to note that for every man I met, the most profound and unrelenting grief and trauma that I encountered in my conversations with them was the lack of and arbitrary access to their families. And the idea of being cut off in this way would be, the right to family life is the most profound thing for any human being. It is what gives us sustenance and meaning. And so combine the arbitrariness of detention with the lack of access to family, including, in particular, the arbitrary rules of difference between high-value and non-high-value detainees. And again, this terminology in itself is deeply offensive, that we would use this kind of language to describe human beings who are being kept without access to the most basic of rights. I also want to say, for the men who've been cleared, who have been cleared and have been told that they are free to go if someone will take them, the lack of constant and unsupervised access to their families is, in my view, unacceptable and has no basis, given that they've been through a clearance process. Again, access to family is easily fixed, even in the current conditions at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, if the government was willing to do it. I'm not going to say a great deal about right of access to counsel, but I'm simply going to note that meaningful access to counsel continues to be undermined. And all of the extraordinary lawyers in the room and the lawyers who have been the lifeline of support for these men are the single point of access to the outside world. So cutting them off is, again, not just a violation of a fundamental human right in this context, but it actually is a cut off from other rights in this context. The same is true of the right to fair trial, which I make a number of comments about. But let me close by saying what my findings were, my ultimate findings when I concluded the report on the current conditions of detention. I do acknowledge in the report that the material conditions of detention have improved since the earliest days. And every man I met also said the same, that things were better. But it is also true that the current conditions, the cumulative finding of my report is the conditions continue to constitute cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment precisely because of these factors joined together and their impact on these men. And it may well be, in my view, that we meet the threshold for torture in this context. Many of the men, I think, would make the point that the gap between the past and the present is non-existent in Guantanamo. So their lived experience, notwithstanding the improvement of condition, means that actually the past isn't the past. The past is the lived present, as Alka has talked about in relation to her client. It is very clear that we need to close Guantanamo, but I would always ask us not to lose sight that the US government has an ongoing obligation to ensure that the current conditions of confinement for those who remain there meet fundamental international standards, which they do not do at this time. Let me say a final couple of 2 minutes, if I have 2 minutes, to say something about the third category that the report addressed, which is repatriation and resettlement. Approximately 744 men have been released to various countries since the Guantanamo Bay facility was put in place. And I want to stress, as I did in my report, that the US continues to have distinct and concrete legal obligations both before, during and after transfer of detainees to other countries, whether that's a country of resettlement or a country of citizenship. When you torture someone, your obligations do not end when you transfer them. There is a clear relationship with the fact of torture and the right of repair for detainees. And I think that fact that we see essentially what I view as a washing of hands of responsibility for former detainees is both incompatible with international law and unacceptable. I am particularly concerned about the transfer process for men that's ongoing. My report notes that men are still shackled, blindfolded, limited when they're moved. Can you imagine what it is like when you were brought in on a plane in a particular way and you go out on a plane in a particular way? How re-traumatizing that is for men who have been cleared by the PRB boards and who are told that they are free to go. The transfer process continues to elicit concerns by my office on ongoing torture. And I want to mention two cases. One that I issued a press statement on last week, which is Ravel Mingzanov, who is currently held in the UAE and is at imminent risk, we understand, of being transferred to Russia. So imagine a scenario in which the United States has transferred an individual to the UAE under diplomatic assurances that that person will not be transferred back to Russia and is at risk of now being transferred. To say that this is both unacceptable and makes a mockery of diplomatic assurances is an understatement. Let me also mention the brothers who are in Kazakhstan, identified in my report. We have men who have been transferred to countries who made assurances, and those assurances are not being met. And other member states, including the European Union, have an obligation to remind those states who took detainees in that those diplomatic assurances must be upheld. And the US has an obligation to resettle people where the first settlement did not work. My final comment is just to note, as a number of the brothers have said, that often resettlement is Camp 8. It is a set of conditions that reproduces or makes worse the realities of their lives. Many of you have no documentation. I have met former detainees who have no papers in third countries. Many of the brothers end up on lists. The question about why people can't move, if you're placed on a terrorism list after you've been cleared, then you can't go anywhere. Many of the men have no access, meaningful access to their families, and there has not been adequate torture rehabilitation for a single person who came out of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So I close by reminding us that we have ongoing obligations. The United States has ongoing obligations to every single detainee who was brought and transferred out of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Those obligations include apology, they include reparation, and they include accountability. And I'll close by reminding us there is no statute of limitations for torture. And the people who ordered, committed, supported, acquiesced in torture remain liable for the rest of their lives for the acts that they have committed. And as Martin Luther King said, sometimes the long arc of justice moves slowly, but we, as Mansour has said, we do not forget, and we don't forget torture. Thank you.
Oh, God. That was powerful. And your report has become compulsive reading. And we're very proud that you're Irish. Andy Worthington is our next speaker. He's an investigative journalist, author, campaigner, commentator, and public speaker. Recognised as an authority on Guantanamo and the war on terror. He's the co-founder of Close Guantanamo, and We Stand with Shakar, campaigning for Shakar Amar. In 2009, Worthington published what has been described as the most definitive annotated list of all Guantanamo detainees. He's the one who introduced us to Mansour. We'd probably never have met Mansour but for Andy.
Thank you, Mick and Claire, and I'm glad I came to you because I thought that you were the can-do people to get an event happening in the EU Parliament, and here we are. It's been amazing and humbling to hear from everyone today. I'd like to go back to the primary reason that I came to Claire and Mick, which was not just for us to call for the closure of Guantanamo, but to come to the EU Parliament to remind EU parliamentarians that a terrible crime scene is still open in Guantanamo and that they can help with it. And so I would like to return to the 16 men who are held at Guantanamo, who have been unanimously approved for release by high-level US government review processes, but are still held. And some men have been released by Biden. Those are the easy ones. They could send them home. The majority of the men who are still held who've been approved for release, the problem is that most of them cannot be sent back to their home countries, and Beth spoke about this. First of all, we have the ban in US law on any prisoner being taken to the US mainland for any reason, including resettlement. And then the bans that have been imposed on certain countries, specifically Yemen, who make up the majority of these men, but also in the cases of the men still held. One example is there's a Somali, and there is also a Libyan. So the whole point of focusing on things today was to try and get to a point where we can put pressure on our leaders to act, to help this very small number of people. Because these men who have been approved for release today have been held for between 370 and 1,035 days since the US told them they didn't want to hold them. We've heard about the 3 cases of the men from 2010. Today it is 4,997 days since the US told them that they didn't want to hold them. A crucial part of this story is that there's no one that these men can appeal to. They cannot go to a judge to call the US government to account for not having freed them, because the decisions that were taken to release them are purely administrative. Purely administrative has nothing to do with the law. And I want everyone here to remember that when these men were first brought to Guantanamo, they were brought to a lawless place. They were held for nearly 2.5 years at Guantanamo fundamentally without any rights whatsoever as human beings. Nearly 22 years on, we have men at Guantanamo approved for release by administrative processes that are not legally enforceable, and I have to ask you whether anything has fundamentally changed. I don't think it has. I think the men held at Guantanamo are fundamentally deprived of any rights as human beings now as they were then. And we can help. The countries of the EU can help. This is the scale of the legal abyss of Guantanamo. The problem, of course, as we all know, is that what happened at Guantanamo was that some of the most successful black propaganda of our lifetimes occurred. Donald Rumsfeld called these people the worst of the worst. It's a problem for countries in Europe because of the taint of terrorism that people can't do the right thing. So maybe we can help to explain the story, which is that no one has any idea whether these people are these people are certainly not terrorists. But from the beginning, it's important to remember the United States government did not know anything about the majority of these men. They were rounded up indiscriminately. People were bought for bounty payments. People were brought from Pakistan, where incredibly unintelligent house raids had taken place, rounding people up to take them to Guantanamo. The first commander of Guantanamo, shortly after the prison had opened, when asked, "Who have we got here?" said, "We don't know. We've got a small number we've identified as Al-Qaeda, a small number we've identified as Taliban. The vast number of people in the middle of those two categories, we have no idea who they are." The second commander of Guantanamo said to people out in Afghanistan, "Stop sending us Mickey Mouse detainees." Those were his words. They didn't know who they had. They never did know who they had. So what did they do? Well, under the next commander, Jeffrey Miller, they started torturing and abusing people to get them to tell lies about their fellow prisoners. The extent of that became apparent when the Guantanamo files were leaked to WikiLeaks by Chelsea Manning, and those files were released in 2011. And people who cared and wanted to look at these files were able to understand that prisoners had lied about each other. Who can blame people for lying under the conditions to which they were subjected? But serial liars are exposed in those files who were relied upon by the US government for their so-called evidence. And it was rubbish. Now, all through this, what rights did these people have at Guantanamo? They had nothing. Lawyers fought for habeas corpus rights. They got those in 2004, June 2004. 2.5 years after the prison opened. Lawyers were allowed into the prison. That's the good thing that came out of that, because Congress was then persuaded to immediately undo the habeas right. The Bush administration set up a kangaroo tribunal process at Guantanamo for looking at the cases of the men, primarily to establish that they had been correctly designated as enemy combatants without rights when they were first brought to Guantanamo. So they have no rights. We know nothing about them. Eventually, in 2008, the prisoners got habeas corpus rights again. And if you're looking at the story of Guantanamo, it was the only time that the law applied. It was for 2 years after that, when judges looked at the cases of 38 men and said the government has failed to provide any meaningful evidence that these people were connected with Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. 6 of those decisions were then overturned by politically motivated conservative appeals court judges who ended up undoing the whole habeas process. By 2010, it was dead. This is the point at which Obama has his first administrative review of the prisoners. So no law is involved in this. The prisoners are not heard from. No lawyers are involved. An administrative process decides what to do with the prisoners. 156 men, they said that they should be released. And all but 3 of them, those men who've been held for 4,997 days, were released. 36 others, they said, should be prosecuted. 48 others were too dangerous to release. Insufficient evidence existed to put them on trial, but they must continue to be held. Obama knew that was a problem, so he set up another review process, the periodic review boards. They didn't begin for 3 years. And they're not interested in innocence or guilt. What they're interested in is a parole type process that is supposed to happen when you've been convicted of something. In this case, the parole process involves you having to be contrite about what you're accused of, whether you did it or not, and demonstrating that you won't be a threat if you're released. It led to 38 men being approved for release. All but 2 of those were freed before Obama left office. 4 years of Trump, let's forget it. Biden comes in and he recognizes through the efforts of lawyers, of NGOs, even of 99 members of Congress, that it is absolutely unforgivable at 20 plus years that the United States is holding men indefinitely without charge or trial at Guantanamo. Most of those men have now been approved for release through the periodic review process. There are only 3 men left who haven't been charged at Guantanamo in this limbo that has been called for many years, and properly by the media, as being forever prisoners. But until these men approved for release are freed, they are also forever prisoners. They remain forever prisoners. The United States has dug the most disgusting immoral hole of its own making at Guantanamo, approving men for release who have never been charged with a crime and not being able to release them. And we are in a place of this powerful political bloc of countries in Europe who can do something about it. And as I say, it's 16 men in total, and I estimate that it's 13 of those men that need resettling. Can we please find a way to do that, and to do our small part in Europe to bring to an end this absolutely monstrous and ongoing injustice? Thank you very much.
A short description of a horror story in layman's language. Thank you very much, Andy, and for your resilience. Mozam Beg is a former Guantanamo Bay prisoner and outreach director for CAGE, a London-based advocacy organisation which aims to empower communities impacted by the war on terror. After Beg's release from Guantanamo in 2005, he became one of the most prominent public speakers and Muslim advocates for justice and dialogue, publishing a book about his experiences and travelling extensively to investigate state abuses. Mozam.
Before we start, one with you guys and one with the panel. There you go. Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Okay. I've just returned recently from Afghanistan, where I visited the scene of a crime. The crime was murder, which I witnessed in 2002 when I was held there for almost a year before I was sent to Guantanamo. The country has, as you know, gone back to the hands of the Taliban, and those who are now in positions of government and power were also held with us in Guantanamo without charge or trial. One of the things we often don't talk about is the largest number of prisoners in Guantanamo were Afghans. And can you imagine that at least 5 to 6 of them are now senior government ministers? You may agree, disagree with the Taliban, but they went through the process that you've just heard of being tortured and dehumanized. They facilitated my visit to the Bagram prison. And we've spoken about the impact of families on prisoners. And as often many prisoners will say, we can take the physical abuse. We can take that. We can even take the degradation. Though internally it burns us, we can take it. What we can't do is be separated from our family members and expect to be normal human beings. I heard of the birth of my child, my youngest child, in that place in Bagram. I didn't see him until he was 3 years old. And up until the time when I did meet him, I thought, what a terrible thing I had gone through. Until I met one of my closest friends who was released from Guantanamo in 2015. He didn't see his youngest son until the child was 14 years old. And recently, as Finola mentioned, that Ravil Mingazov, the Russian, who is impendingly going to be sent to Russia unless there's an intervention, I met with his son. I met Ravil first in the Bagram detention facility. And he's not seen his father, and he's 22 years old. Just graduated from a Westminster university. What kind of a topsy-turvy world are we living in which, in Europe, we had the Holocaust, we had the Nazis' war crimes, but within 1 year of the end of that war, those criminals were put through a legal process in Nuremberg. You have men who've been sitting in Guantanamo for the best part of 2 decades. And the reason why Guantanamo was set up in the first place, 9/11, not a single person has been prosecuted. In fact, as I said, senior members of the Taliban and beyond are now running their country. How has that happened? And it's because I venture a mixture of different things. But I'll give you an example because mention was made of General Jeffrey Miller, one of I think the 3rd Guantanamo commander. When I was held in solitary confinement, where I was in Guantanamo for 2 years in pure solitary confinement, General Jeffrey Miller comes along and he tells the soldiers, son, you're on the front line here. You're guarding very dangerous men, meaning me. And during his time, he brought in the enhanced interrogation technique program, which is just another euphemism for torture, cruelty, and degrading treatment. But he was redeployed. From Guantanamo, he was redeployed. And do you know where he was redeployed to? Abu Ghraib. And he began the Guantanamoization of the prison process in Iraq. And if you want to know what happened as a result of that torture, just think of this. 17 leaders of ISIS, 17 of their 25 leaders were held in Camp Bucca and Abu Ghraib, all dressed in orange jumpsuits and tortured. And somebody said earlier on, I think Mansour said, we are all affected by the legislation, by the effects of breaking down, invading, occupying sovereign countries. We haven't begun to look at the effects of the invasion, the torture, the imprisonment of the Afghans, who constituted the largest number, not just of prisoners in Guantanamo, but if you go to the Bagram detention facility, the old one where I was held and saw prisoners beaten and tortured to death. Some with their hands tied above their heads to the top of the cage, being punched and kicked by the American soldiers because they found it amusing that every time this prisoner is kicked, he says, Allah, Allah. So they say, let's see how many times this prisoner will say Allah, Allah tonight. And in the case of this particular person that I saw murdered, he said it 200 times. Kicked to death. That's just one out of thousands of cases. Now, having seen all of this for the past 17, 18 odd years since I've been campaigning against Guantanamo, the voice of the prisoners is paramount. It is extremely important. At the beginning of Biden's presidency, myself, Moussa here, who's a Belgian former Guantanamo prisoner, and we welcome him for being here, Moussa, Lakhtar, Mansour, Mohamedou, and Ahmed Rashidi, all of us, 7 of us, who are all published authors. We wrote an article in the New York Review of Books, an open letter to Biden, offering him and describing for him a roadmap of how he can close Guantanamo. And that included, because one of the most important things, as Finola's alluded to, is that how do you live a meaningful life after you've been called a terrorist by the most powerful nation on earth with the collusion of your own governments? How do you do that? How do you open a bank account? How do you travel without getting stopped every time you enter a country? When I came here, my heart's going, well, at border. Are they going to let me in? Are they going to say something? Are they going to say, sir, follow us, come with us, we need to talk to you, as has happened many times, as has happened to many of the former prisoners, for those who have the ability to travel, because as you've said, most of them can't even travel. So you can do this quite easily. Why have they done this to us? It's because you've looked at us and said, essentially, they're not human beings. The most basic forms of the freedom to travel, the freedom to against torture, the freedom to be described with and treated as a human being has been taken from you by a nation. Now, this is so important. Guantanamo isn't the worst prison in the world, but it is the most notorious. When General Jeffrey Miller went to Iraq, he said, I am going to Guantanamo-ize the detainee process. Guantanamo-izing something simply means removing the rule of law, removing the presumption of innocence, removing habeas corpus, removing, you know, in the United States of America, they have this thing that's part of the Constitution that was born in the United Kingdom called Magna Carta. And of it are just three remaining relevant clauses, of one of which is, to no man shall justice be delayed or denied, except that they will be judged by a court of their peers, unless you're a Muslim. They didn't add that part then, but they added it now. Because to be a prisoner in Guantanamo, the first condition isn't that you're a terrorism suspect. If that was the case, you'd have people from every different background in Guantanamo as a terrorist suspect. But the world has said that essentially not all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims. That's the mantra. Therefore, to be a prisoner in Guantanamo, the first condition is you must be a Muslim. Doesn't matter which part of the world from, doesn't matter whether you're black or white or Asian, you must be a Muslim. The second condition is that you're captured in this war on terrorism. So I'm going to end on something that I think is important, just from a personal experience. And that is that when I went to Bagram, I'd gone to make a film about returning to a scene of the crime, that this is where hundreds of us were held before we were sent to Guantanamo. By the time I had finished with Bagram, I was begging the Americans to send me to Guantanamo. After everything you've heard about Guantanamo, I was begging to be sent there because of all of the abuses I witnessed there. But here, as Mansour and others have said, that this abuse, it doesn't just end with you as the prisoner. The abuser himself has to live with what they've done. So this is a message, a letter that was sent to me by a prisoner. He says, Mr. Beg, I was a US Army soldier MP, which is military police, at Bagram from 2002 to April 2003. I don't understand everything that transpired, but I was there when you were, and I remember you. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because it's quite long. What he says is that, as for you, and I don't feel that you personally trespassed against me, but I worry if your capture and imprisonment was unjust, that my contribution to it holds me in jeopardy. Therefore, I beg of you, brother, your forgiveness. I never took any part or pleasure in your sadistic abuse. In fact, I felt bad for you and all of the others. He continues to say, war is so difficult, I still have nightmares every time I sleep. I pray the Almighty gives you better rest than me. And then he continues to say, I hope you have no animosity towards me, and that on Judgment Day, you can witness for me that even though I had opportunities, I never intentionally mistreated any of you. One more bit of irony. On my father's side, I am a Native American. Prior to the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, my grandparents weren't even US citizens, but we were used and mistreated. They weren't even considered citizens, let alone human beings. So thank you for taking the time to hear me. Peace.
Thank you very much. Another incredible, moving testimony. Thanks to all 9 contributors today. You've all been powerful. Thanks too to Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange. Let's hope we all feel a responsibility not to be silent and to stand up against injustice wherever we see it. Thank you. Mansour wants to make a video for 30 seconds with the crowd. We're kind of out of time for questions and answers. Well, we'll let him make his video, and if he leaves a bit of time, we might take 1 or 2 questions. We're clobbered at 12.
30-second video. Like, as you know, my Habibi Biden, I'm going to send him a message today. I have been sending these messages, but today I told him we need to talk. Today I'm going to tell him that you need to talk to him. I'm going to record and post it later. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Habibi Biden, grandfather. How are you today? They need to talk to you. Not me today, but they need to talk to you. Guys. So, close Guantanamo. The message. Thank you so much.
Right, we have 5 minutes. I want to ask a short question. Go ahead.
What can we do as normal citizens that aren't lawyers or anything special? What can we do?
Right, next question. Deepa.
Thank you. Deepa Driver, legal observer in the case of Julian Assange. Firstly, solidarity to Mansour Lakhtar, James, Moazzam, Musa, and all those whose families have been traumatized by Guantanamo. I have a question for Alka and Fionnuala, which is, could you tell us a little bit more about how we are going to deal with a rogue state that chooses to classify somebody as an enemy combatant, chooses to ignore international law, including the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention's findings, UN Special Rapporteur's findings, and how we are going to bring them back into the global community? And the second part of my question is, how are we going to deal with the complicity of professionals, whether it's lawyers, psychologists, military personnel, those who are, because you are the exception, Beth is the exception. The rule is those who are turning a blind eye to torture. So what are we going to do to address that? Thank you.
Okay, we have, of the 4 speakers, we'll give you 1 minute each to cover both questions.
I mean, I think what ordinary citizens have to do is not forget Guantanamo. Write to your, ministers, write to your parliamentarians, show up. I mean, do not forget. This is the key point. And it's the empowerment. Guantanamo is really sticky for good reason. States, the US is stuck with the legacy of Guantanamo, and let's transform it into something that's powerful and loud and unbreakable in terms of the idea of accountability, the idea of reparation, the idea of apology. It is in all of our capacity to not let it go away. And maybe we should talk afterwards about what we do with states who ignore international law. But the point is that if we don't stop talking about it, it doesn't go away. And this is the point. Guantanamo does not go away for as long as we continue to be the voices, particularly the brothers who speak so powerfully and are living resistance to what was done there. And I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, obviously, but for ordinary citizens, and I don't believe there are ordinary citizens, right? Everyone can do something. The last slide that I had that I didn't have much time to spend on had a series of, I know Twitter is dying and all of that, but had a series of Twitter handles that I would encourage all of you to follow for constant information about Guantanamo and the developments, both on both sides, on the habeas side and the military commission side, who's been cleared, what fresh new crisis there is, and amplify as much as you can, please. Look, my fellow Americans have forgotten about Guantanamo. They've either forgotten about it or they've been lulled into this sense of complacency that we don't love it, but perhaps it's necessary because there's been such a good propaganda campaign for so long about it. So I encourage people to just hear the voices and amplify as much as possible. On Deepa's question, let me just say this, right? I don't believe sitting here today that there will ever be prosecutions of John Yoo, who currently holds a named chair at Berkeley, or any of the CIA personnel who tortured Ammar, right, who remain nameless. I don't know their names. We're not allowed to know their names. But accountability takes many forms. And I will say, the CIA, I think DOD hates when we say this, but one of the things that we have done with the corrupt military commissions at Guantanamo is attempt to turn it into a forum for accountability in terms of getting as much information into the public domain, declassified as possible about what the CIA did to these people and why that renders the entire construct illegitimate. And so we are still trying to do that. I wouldn't abolish the possibility of truth and reconciliation commissions, of further measures of justice in the future. But that all, we just have to keep pushing for it.
As we're here in the EU Parliament, I can only say that the thing to do is to start making as much noise as possible in the countries that you live in, and to urge, to demand that the leaders of your countries do the right thing. We are on the right side of history, and everyone who holds a position of political power is absolutely on the wrong side of history.
Myself and Andy, and I think Musa, were here almost more than 10 years ago. I think it was the only other discussion taking place about Guantanamo in the European Union. And there are far more people here now than there were back then. So is that progress? I guess it is. There are a lot more people out of Guantanamo since then, but there's still 30 there, 30 too many. One of the things that I notice here is that, for obviously whatever reasons, we need the youth on our side. And one of the things I do often is speaking at universities, and speaking at the same university again and again and again every single year. And I never tire because it's always a new generation. And those generations must know you'll be shocked about the numbers of young people who have no idea about Guantanamo. And that's our collective fault. They'll know about conflicts that took place in different continents decades and hundreds of years ago, because we teach them that at schools and universities. But we don't talk about what's happening right now. And that is something we need to rectify.
Okay, so can I first of all thank our interpreters, who I know are out of time 3 minutes ago. We really appreciate their work and their presence here. And to me is the unenviable task of summarising today's meetings, which I have sobbed my way through. I don't feel bad or embarrassed about that. Myself and Mick have been known when we were in the Irish Parliament to be whingers now and again. But I think it is entirely appropriate. There's a lot worse things you can do other than cry when what we've listened to here today. It has been a sobering and powerful meeting. We have borne witness to the best and worst of humanity here. We have seen what can be done to our fellow human beings, but we have seen how the human spirit can rise up against it and keep on fighting. And the pledge of every one of us here has to be to take that and say, we will pick up the mantle that these wonderful individuals have carried for so long. First and foremost, obviously, the brothers, the people who are still there, but their representatives and their voices here today, Lakbar, Moisam and Mansour. You certainly haven't forgot about the others, and they will be so proud to see you here and know that we are behind you in that. Tremendous. The wonderful fact we often give out about the US administration and none best than US citizens themselves, but it shows the best of the US that it produces such wonderful lawyers like Alka and Beth and and wonderful, passionate human beings like Valerie, who lost a family member in 9/11 and yet is standing behind other people who are also the victims of 9/11. It's the best that comes out of the US, and the men are so lucky to have you, and James as well. I'm sorry he had moved from the centre. James was absolutely magnificent as well. And of course, Fionnuala, who we are very proud to take our part in her, because her role as the UN Special Rapporteur was absolutely immense. I don't want to finish the meeting without paying special thanks to my own staff member, Nicola. He has been, stand up there. All our staff are wonderful, but Nicola has been the one who made these events happen, who did all of the administration and all of the work. And what we need to do going from here is precisely what has been said. We need to target the EU member states. In fairness, there have been successful, very small number, but successful resettlements in Ireland. We know in all the European countries the climate is very hostile to refugees and migrants, and governments are under pressure and, they don't want to touch these terrorists or whatever. But we're talking about a very small number of people, and our job is to bring the humanity, the illegality that was done to these people, and to show the human side of the violations, because I have no doubt that Guantanamo was a crime against humanity, but it remains a crime against humanity for the people who are there and the people who are living their lives after it. So we've got to go and pressurise all of our governments.
And can I say something? Just because Guantanamo is on the island of Cuba does not mean that the Cuban people are not standing against Guantanamo. They understand 72 years of the violence that has been caused to them. But I've been there when Cubans have been fighting for youth who were in Guantanamo. So sometimes it gets, because it's mentioned in the island of Cuba, but Cuban people have stood in solidarity with all those of yourselves.
Look, absolutely. It is a worldwide struggle. And what I suggest is that we finish now. I don't know if Mansour wants to lead us in a chant or maybe a song, but the colleagues will stay and the panel will be available outside. They'll answer questions. If you anything you want to know. And Dennis and the team there as well, who are some other great US lawyers, also will be there in terms of their clients. So if you want to engage, talk to any of the panel outside, have a chat here, we're absolutely happy to do that. So do you want to wrap up with a chant or something?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much it was lovely meeting you and talking to you. Thank you to Meg and Claire, also Nicola. So I hope you enjoyed the trip to Guantanamo with us, of course. Our going to Guantanamo. So the last the singing Guantanamo, it was a part of our survival, of our identity there. So when someone arrived, we will sing encouragement, especially when they took people to interrogation, torture, or new people arrived at Guantanamo. So we have this kind of, that first sing you heard, you heard. And the last one, when someone leave Guantanamo or leave the block, we sang this song, I'm going to sing for you all, which means, go with peace, may Allah grant you more safety and peace. So here it is. روح مع السلامة الله يزيدك أمن وسلامة روح مع السلامة الله يزيدك أمن وسلامة. May Allah grant you all peace and safety. Thank you so much.
To pose for a photo, do you want everybody us down here, or with the room, or you want all our you want everyone here? So we'll go down there, so the rest of you can stay standing, but we'll get a picture of everyone. And there are, I should have said, there are T-shirts, there are closed Guantanamo wristbands.